Chapter 23, Nahezra. Chapter text. In the wizarding world, the concept of blood is deeply embedded in society. Terms such as pure blood, half-blood, and muggle-born are commonly used and widely understood. Many purebloods, as well as some half-bloods, believe that the more magical blood a wizard possesses, the more powerful they are. Among humans, this belief is both false and partially true. Muggle-born wizards are at a clear disadvantage. They learn of magic much later than their peers. They must absorb not only the standard wizarding curriculum, but also adjust to an entirely unfamiliar world. As a result, they tend to perform more poorly than pure-blood and half-blood students. Subjects such as potions, herbology, and runes are purely knowledge-based. This knowledge is not gained solely through books. Much of it is absorbed through experience and informal exposure. Inquisitive minds may acquire it in passing from their families or communities. Even at Hogwarts, one of the most Muggle-born friendly schools in Europe, an entire quarter of the student body is openly hostile to their presence. The pureblood dogma is incorrect. While many believe that magic is internal, this is not the case. Magic exists externally. It is a force that surrounds all living beings and is harnessed by both magical creatures and humans. Although magical creatures exhibit slight variations in how this energy is managed, all magical beings generally draw from external sources to fuel their abilities. The exhaustion and fatigue experienced by magic wielders originates from within. The magic flows through conduits in the body. These conduits are imperfect. Some barriers to magic are psychological, others are genetic. All human beings draw from the same magical source. No wizard is inherently more powerful than another by virtue of blood. In magic, emotional and mental states determine the control and precision of magical flow. Even minimal self-doubt can cripple a wizard before a duel begins. Most important, however, is knowledge. Knowledge of spells, knowledge of dueling, and knowledge of magical theory and its effects. Purebloods were stronger and appeared to be more magically gifted. This was because of the pure hubris powering them. Half-bloods and muggle-born wizards were stronger due to pure spite and willpower. This was a powerful driving force as well. The need to be better, the need to be stronger. In humans, your confidence and your willpower played the strongest role in how powerful you will be. In the animal kingdom, magical subspecies were superior in every way to their mundane counterparts. No amount of hubris, confidence, or bravery could bridge that gap. Eisen openly revealed himself to the Albanian forest for days, and the first entity he managed to attract was the last one that would see him alive. Eisen had not a drop of magical blood in him, and the serpent currently playing games with his limited awareness knew that. She had not had this much fun in a while, but she was growing bored with the predictable responses from the baby. "Hello, my name is Eisen. I know you can hear me. Why won't you come out?" She refused to know him as Eisen. She just replaced the word Eisen with baby in her head. He was a little baby, a hatchling which managed to scare an entire forest of snakes. She sensed the snakes far away, eagerly waiting for her demise. They did not know what she knew about Eisen. They feared an idiot. Every time the great serpent feinted the presence of a snake somewhere in the distance, the small snake would repeat that line like some sort of human automaton. Was this her great usurper? Was this who her followers feared? She considered the merits of another great cull. The quality of followers always improved after she eradicated the lot of them. The mundane snake showed no self-preservation instincts, no sign of self-awareness. She was positioned above the oblivious snake, stalking him and feeding him fabricated signals of other snakes for over an hour at this point. She did it again, testing whether Eisen would finally notice something strange happening. For this last one, she made it blatantly obvious that someone was toying with his senses. She simulated the scent of a snake she saw a few times before. A naga, a very rare and very powerful creature. They did not spend time in places such as this, and the great serpent traveled great distances to meet their colony. "Hello, my name is Eisen. I know you can hear me. Why won't you come out?" The little respect she had for the snake disappeared. The foolish snake mistook the scent of a naga for that of a common forest snake. She thought about it. Did the foolish snake just try to call a naga to itself? She began to actually wonder about the small creature before her. Was he new to the forest? It seemed impossible for this creature to survive for as long as it had. It was hard for the great serpent to decide whether Eisen was brave or foolish. She was inclined to believe it was more foolish than brave, but she couldn't be certain. Eventually, after Eisen happily called out to the scent of a minor serpent, the great serpent flew into a terrible rage. The snake had to be foolish to think it had a chance to survive against even a weaker cousin of her species. She had grown tired of this game. It was fun at first, for a while. Slithering on the ground silently, keeping close enough to move quickly to cover if he turned around. Climbing a nearby tree Eisen would pass near to signal the presence of another snake. It was fun while she kept the species of the snakes mundane. Now he was not even pretending to be wise about what he alerted to his presence. She was frankly tired of climbing and descending trees silently, and whatever this Eisen character was, she was tired of thinking about it. The great serpent responded to the clueless snake. "Young snake, it seems you have found me." The serpent hissed. Eisen could tell the voice was female, but he could not make out a single word. The hiss was coarse, grating, and loud. It sounded like a harsh, guttural rasp that scraped against his ears, like sandpaper dragged across steel or nails on a chalkboard. It hurt to listen to the thing behind him. Eisen hissed in fear and turned. A beautiful black great serpent with menacing orange and yellow spots slithered gracefully down the nearest tree. She was long, dangerous, and beautiful. The great serpent appeared to dance its way to the roots of the tree, slithering closer until its head emerged from the shade. The obsidian serpent's eyes hit the light and shimmered like molten gold. The eyes themselves, on further inspection, were anomalous. Green irises like Eisen's master claimed he had. Jade emeralds floating on a sea of gold. The serpent bent light unnaturally. It was darker near her. The serpent correctly interpreted the snake's stunned silence as an inability to understand her words. She fell completely silent, then spoke in a calm, near whisper to the limited creature. She could not make her message any simpler than this. If he somehow still failed to comprehend, she was going to start tearing him apart until he understood or died. "Snakes in these forests have been speaking of you. I know this is not your magic. It is the magic of a human." Again, Eisen was overwhelmed by the monstrous serpent and her voice, but this time he could hear her words. Her words were not entirely audible to him, but he got the context through the words he could hear. "Yes, I have a master who can speak to snakes. He claims to have been able to speak to snakes since he first met us." The predator stopped imagining how to tear the young snake to pieces. Something the baby said jolted her memory. Humans could use rituals or potions to mimic their language, but these methods would never work on a non-magical snake. Only true speakers could communicate with mundane snakes like this one. Was this one a magical snake after all? She scented offensively toward the smaller snake, clearly indicating that she did not trust his words, while also probing the magic that lay upon him. Once again, she felt no magic within the snake. The magic was upon him and around him. He was in contact with a human. It was possible the baby was not lying to her. It was at this moment that Eisen began to question his decision to venture into the forest in search of others of his kind. Even with his limited time in the pet shop, he understood that it was considered rude to scent another snake so obviously. There was something undeniably alien about the serpent before him. He decided to end the silence by asking his own question. "You are a very large and beautiful snake. What's your name?" Visions of a shredded garden snake flickered through her mind. Twice, 3 times, she stopped herself. Eisen's mangled corpse appeared in different corners of the clearing, blood soaking the earth where he now was. The serpent's gaze locked onto the tiny snake before her, her fangs aching to sink into his scaly flesh. She looked away. She looked at the trees above while continuing to probe at the magic around the snake. She could not look at Eisen without launching into an attack. She needed self-control. She was not very good at self-control, but she needed to find some. She fought the primal urge to chase the little snake through the forest, tear a piece from him, let him flee, then catch him again. It was not easy. In that instant, she could hear the blood running through Eisen and could practically taste it. To be called a snake by a snake was intolerable. Did he not see the difference? She, for the 4th time, fought her immediate instincts. The serpent's hatred of inferior beings ran deep, and nothing was more demeaning than being reduced to such a label. Pride demanded the immediate death of the offending creature, but she tamped down the impulse. The chance of meeting a true speaker was worth the indignity. The serpent kept scenting the smaller snake, drawing closer as Eisen drew backwards. Yet another game the young one seemed eager to play, and it was making her irrationally angry. She was losing it. After another retreating move, she once again fought the urge to maul the smaller snake. She froze the snake. His fear turned to terror as the serpent moved closer and closer, her tongue making rapid, darting movements. The young snake tried to follow the movements of the larger predator. Only his eyes moved. He was frozen as the serpent drew closer and closer. The gold and green eyes of the serpent were massive, and soon it was all he could see. Eisen was terrified. The serpent looked away from him over his tiny head. This scared him more than anything else. I am not a snake. I am a great serpent. You are a snake. The others are snakes. You will learn the difference between us soon. The hissing was at her normal intensity once again, and after her words, Eisen descended into total panic. His instincts were underdeveloped, but he knew with certainty that this was the end of his life. He had no other options, no way to avoid this. He would beg for his life if he could and promise to never return. The young snake could not understand the serpent's voice. She was hurting him with her voice. He wished he stayed with his master. He wished he was back at the store. Chapter 24. The Power of Nahezra. In Albania, many things are legal that are not in wizarding London. Use of dark magic is much more heavily regulated. Please take some time and become acquainted with our laws and customs. By using this portkey, you acknowledge you have accepted this warning. Harry walked out of the Albanian embassy, greeted by the familiar sights of the London skyline. There was no place like home, and there was no denying that he felt safer here. The young wizard did sometimes miss the shack. He thought about his life with Raken in the forest often. Pierre was his constant companion while he was learning French. The other portraits came around when Harry became proficient. He wished he had had more time with them, the 4 French scholars. Harry Potter took his first steps in London after spending months away. It was early morning, 6:15 to be precise, and the young wizard was cautiously optimistic about his chances alone in London. Nahezra had convinced him after his close call with the tent in Albania, but it was different now. He was just an apprentice potioneer with a serpent under his cloak. Walking and moving his body with the serpent within his robes was an interesting experience. It became hard to change directions and to stop and start moving. Once he was in motion, it was a far easier walk. The serpent was almost constantly moving, a constant reminder that he was encased by a living being. Nahezra was a helpful companion. She told him things. It was almost as though she knew what he was thinking before he could verbalize it to her. He felt his fear and struck up conversations about anything. About Raken, about potion law, about his plans for the future. Nahezra asked these questions like the counselors in the orphanage that would sometimes visit them. She asked him about his favorite avenues of magic to study. She asked him questions in the topics she understood, like runes. She had a far larger understanding of runes than he did, and she asked him if he ever used practical runes outside of extractions. Harry passed by yet another enchanted sign offering pets. The window sign showed flashing images of a dog and cat chasing each other in circles while an owl hovered overhead. This made Harry think of another question he wanted to ask his constant companion. Nahezra. The serpent stopped scenting Harry's magic. The boy was doing perfectly well, even after not resting for over 3 hours. She was impressed with the boy's drive. He was determined not to complain about Nahezra's weight, even when she forgot to weave more compulsions, allowing more of her weight to slip into his consciousness. She was quite affectionate towards the child and responded in a very sweet tone. Yes, Harry. You said you're not like other magical creatures. Remember when you said you were more than them. Nahezra said this, but she wasn't sure Harry would take it in the correct context. As she expected, Harry misinterpreted her words. The boy had a very strong grasp of her language, but it appeared as though some context was lost. It was still far less lost than she was used to with wizards using a ritual or potion to twist their words and comprehend hers. She wondered if the other snakes Harry spoke of in the zoo had told him how to use his ability. Yes, I am not like other magical creatures. I am subject to some of, but not all of their laws. So can you take other magical creatures as pets? The serpent was in an almost constant state of distraction, having to keep track of Harry's compulsions and keep herself aware of Harry's position. Generally, she found that Harry was very easy to keep occupied by simply having him answer his own questions. The boy required very little input from her, mostly spending most of their conversations speaking at length while she interjected and asked simple questions. Sometimes, in moments like these, Harry would ask a brilliant question. You're referencing the idea that some magical beings can communicate with non-magical creatures, but this doesn't necessarily grant them control or dominance over them. Nahezra wondered, not for the first time, how a boy so hilariously unaware of wizarding society and wizarding history knew so much about magical theory. She supposed she had Raken to thank for his uneven education. The laws of magical creatures was something Harry was quite knowledgeable about. Full-grown scholars she interacted with were less knowledgeable than Harry. Of course, Harry's lack of knowledge about the Statue of Secrecy and the Goblin Wars was appalling. A well-known law of magical creatures. A dog would not listen to the instructions of a house elf in the same way they would a human. The cause of this law was unknown to humankind, but it was a very curious phenomenon and one of the most studied. A dog trained to react to the command, sit, would not listen to that command if made by a magical creature capable of speech. Any magical creature, even ones which could perfectly mimic the cadence, appearance, and the smell of the dog's owner. This law was further baffling in the instance of magical owls. The owls used by the wizarding world were magical. Either they were of a magical species, or they were enchanted. Magical owls could and would listen to a house elf or any other magical creature with the same level of respect as they would a human. This effect carried over to dogs, mice, and any animal that was enchanted. Yes, Raken brought that up when I was going over ritual extraction for the first time. Yes, I actually can control mundane species and muggles. In Albania, I had a Harry, watch your step. Nahezra's lost concentration, and her memory of Albania caused some of her compulsions to lose power. Harry's gait became slightly more even off to one side, causing him to nearly miss a step down. Harry himself was distracted, listening to the beautiful whispered hisses of the serpent intently. This was not the first time Harry was too caught up in a story to pay attention, and so she scolded him about it. Harry, you must pay attention. When I whisper to you, stay alert, stay focused. Our communication takes magic and will require you to focus more to understand me, but if you don't force it, allow the words to filter into your mind, you will have a much easier time in the end. I'm sorry, what did you have in Albania? Right, as I was saying. Back in Albania, I had a whole coven worshipping me like a goddess. Harry did as Nahezra said, allowing her words to just magically appear in his head instead of actively forcing the process. Humans commonly learn the difference between hearing and listening, but in this case, passive listening was far better than actively deciphering each word and phrase. The serpent's words did help, and he even noticed that Nahezra's hisses took on a different tone at the word goddess. The young wizard noticed that the serpent had a strange tendency not to speak about angels or demons if asked about them. He thought this was quite odd because she herself was a demon. The serpent refused to talk about demons or religion at all, always changing the topic of discussion. Whenever she did use words like goddess, which Harry noticed was quite often, her hisses took on a less sophisticated tone. She spoke about divinity plenty, once you did not bring her attention to it. Harry cut a left, and the residential area still looked familiar to him. He guessed he was somewhere near Nocturne, but away from the shopping district. Harry stopped here and read the street signs, trying to pick out any that stood out to him. He saw Areopita Avenue and immediately knew where he was in relation to where he wanted to be. This was one of the main streets within Nocturne, the heart of the shopping district. In Areopita, there were more upscale stores, particularly for clothing and merchandise. Harry knew, find a side street to Nocturne Alley and then get to Diagon from there. He did it once before with Raken when they went clothes shopping. It was a very long but easy journey. His serpent, once again, had a shorter path to Gringotts. We are in a residential side street off Nocturne Alley. If you take a left here, between these two buildings, we can avoid most of the alley and get to Gringotts quickly. Put on your hood. We cannot let them know that you are a child." Harry peered down a dark, decrepit alleyway. This was the first time the serpent had such a gloomy shortcut that made Harry pause. The strange thing was that Harry was simply unaware of this alleyway until Nahezra told him about it. The walkway between the two buildings led directly into a chain-link fence with another building behind it. After this point, he could either go left or right, leaving the access point he came from. Harry dropped his gaze and followed instructions, covering his head. The serpent's navigation skills were perfect as far as Harry could tell. She never led him astray, always pinpointing the quickest route. Before he reached the fence, she directed him to turn right. He did, and after 3 building lengths of open space, a wooden fence blocked his path, with a stray cat lounging against it. As Harry approached the wooden fence, the serpent's voice guided him through the winding alleyway. But something confused him. The direction they'd entered from didn't seem to match up with his surroundings. If he followed instructions, he should return to Ariapita Avenue. Instead, he saw more of the same nondescript street stretching out before him, with another building looming in the distance. It was as though they'd skipped over a chunk of the city altogether. Vents and exhaust pipes vented strange gases into the walk spaces. Sometimes, he saw mud with boot prints or discarded articles of clothing. Harry heard people, but he had not seen anyone as yet, only proof of their existence. There were open doorways, clothes washing themselves behind fences, and general sounds of life. Harry wondered how many people actually lived in this area. There were many buildings, but he thought it odd that he wouldn't see a single other wizard on his journey. Naraz's guidance gave him directions that avoided other wizards. He made his way through the true heart of magical London, busy inns and large apartment buildings, narrow streets with very little light. Harry noted how oddly narrow the buildings were. Each building he walked past was tall and only wide enough for its single door. They defied physics, reaching up to the sky like fingers. Windows appeared at random intervals. Some were open, displaying impossibly cramped living conditions. Harry was unaware of this part of magical London. He knew of the residential areas, and he knew of the shopping districts. Raken never mentioned this strange maze, and his master mentioned everything about magical London. Raken was unaware of this part of London. This area was only known to those who lived here or those who had previously lived here. Ironically enough, school-age Muggle-born wizards were the most unaware of this part of magical London. Pure-blood and half-blood children knew that the sketchy vendors ventured out early in the morning and late at night from their creature-infested hovels. This very well-hidden nexus of the lower-class population was completely invisible to the Muggle-born wizards who came into magical society. They listened to their half-blood peers or the whispers and rumors from Hogwarts students. However, after graduating and facing significant challenges in securing well-paying jobs due to their blood status, many Muggle-born wizards found it tough to readjust to the Muggle world. After their years of magical training, it was hard to receive a Muggle education. The Muggle-born wizards, after their repeated failures to acclimate to the mundane world again, became the ones to live in Nocturne. Not in the residential areas, not in an inn within the shopping district, but within the slums. While Muggle slums often sprawled on the outskirts of cities, their magical counterparts were within magical London's most affluent districts. Unlike their Muggle equivalents, these hidden enclaves were invisible to the wizarding middle class. Overcrowding is exacerbated by magical housing that prioritizes vertical space, and makeshift spellwork can create hazardous living conditions. They used the same magical technology that Harry's tent used. Safeguarding more than one person was costly, and Harry's 5-person safeguard had clearly been worth the expense. In contrast, the buildings around them, each housing dozens, were protected by safeguards that only accounted for one person, usually the owner. These safeguards were designed to kick in during emergencies. Any number of causes could make pocket dimension charms fail. Harry's tent failed to magical overload. Harry ventured through the odd-smelling alleyways with the strange buildings and the stray cats. He just kept moving, ignoring the sounds of shouting within the buildings or the occasional puddles of water the serpent told him to avoid. The buildings and the constant twists and turns drained him. He could not speak to Nahezra as she quietly hissed directions to him. The air was hot. No natural light from the sun reached Harry, but the dense concrete building just made everything hot. He needed to get off his feet. He was exhausted. He needed new clothes. He needed a break. He suspected heavily that Nahezra was hiding her weight somehow. He wished she would up the effect. Nahezra gave Harry another set of directions and began paying more attention to his compulsions once again. He took a few more steps, and suddenly the weight he felt disappeared once again. The maze appeared to be coming to an end. The strange puddles of water were less frequent. Nahezra actively made the lives of the downtrodden worse. Harry's compulsions were not the normal ones used by witches and wizards for nefarious reasons. No being could stack so many normal compulsions on a singular human without them going insane, so the compulsions she used simply redirected Harry's feelings. His fatigue and hunger simply passed over to her, and while in the Albanian forest, she felt every step Harry took keenly. These people were defeated. They died a very long time ago, accepting their lives within the slums. The negative energy fed her, and she passed Harry's feelings towards the general atmosphere. In a process not very well understood by humans, the serpent took the natural feelings of despair and sadness and fed from it, returning Harry's pain in return. She perked up nicely, and Harry felt better. Those who happened to be near Harry felt much worse, but they were unable to identify why. Nahezra hummed inaudibly as she was surrounded by the poverty and depravity around her. The negative emotions of the residents satisfied her and helped her ignore the magical drain. She did a very good job of ensuring Harry met no undesirables while still giving them a direct path through the midst of the confused and angry witches and wizards. She did not want Harry championing some noble cause to save those people. Still, some of the people within the slums were truly wretched. The serpent feared that any interaction with the very lowest class of wizarding society might change his outlook or view. She liked how pragmatic and straightforward Harry's thoughts and opinions were. The boy cared little for morality and tried to make decisions outside of his emotions. She supposed she had Raken to thank for that. She would reward him with a quick death. But once more, Nahezra's thoughts turned to the story Harry told her. It was the only time she checked if he was lying. She could not understand how a magical child ended up in a Muggle orphanage. Nahezra ceased her train of thought, focusing on Harry's current location and preparing the next step for the boy. As Harry stepped out of the maze, the familiar sights and sounds of Diagon Alley enveloped him. The busy early morning streets were lined with shops and vendors. Harry blinked in the bright light, feeling a sense of normalcy wash over him after the twisted, narrow streets they'd navigated. People of all ages hurried past, going about their daily business, and the sound of laughter and chatter filled the air. Harry turned around, but oddly enough, could not see where he came from. Focus, the white building, is the Gringotts building. Harry once again wondered how the serpent could see while under the robes. Harry tried to make himself look presentable by looking into a nearby magic mirror. The mirror made Harry's hood and robe look purple, but still, Harry smoothed himself out, looking for obvious signs of the serpent. He did have an oddly shaped mass. It was not obvious unless you looked specifically for it. After Harry was satisfied with his look, he took off his hood, and the pair made their way to the bank. The serpent got to work, taking a mental note of the magic she had expended so far. This was going to be by far the most draining part of the trip. She could no longer ignore her fatigue. She was surrounded by happy, joyful people taking advantage of early morning shopping deals. Her muscles ached as if she had been coiled too tightly for hours. Harry's compulsions were devastating to keep in place. Still, she had to use even more magic, far more than she was currently using. Nahezra currently expended energy doing periodic short-ranged magical scans for Harry. She still needed to make sure he was doing fine, and she did this every few seconds, too worried to delay them for longer, but too tired to do them more often. This was how she noticed when her compulsions were failing. The compulsions were the major drain, and she was about to make that seem like nothing with this new venture. Nahezra reached out magically, searching in a radius centered around herself. Magic called to magic, and she checked for any magical living creatures within her range. The energy drain dwarfed her compulsion work. Any wizard with detection abilities in Diagon Alley would sense her magical signature like a beacon. It required effort. Each magical signature she picked up was nothing more than a vague blip. She had to take that blip and figure out what she had detected. The serpent scanned the environment around Harry. She felt herself moving closer to the bank, and she tried her best to disregard the unimportant humans near Harry, focusing entirely on the bank. The serpent was highly resistant to detection by her nature. She was almost immune to magical detection in regular cases. If she stopped the scans, no humans and most magical creatures would have any idea she was there. Nahezra flicked her tongue at an almost frantic pace. She scented the air around Harry constantly and scanned the magic of him and everyone else around him. Harry Potter, according to her best guesses, was coming to the end of his ability to ignore his fatigue. There was a limit to how much her compulsions could help, and he was rapidly reaching that limit. She poured more magic into the compulsions, trading some resolution in her magical scans. She fought to balance the two magical and mental loads precisely. Both her scans and Harry's compulsions needed magic to function. Shifting magic away from her compulsions would cause them to weaken and potentially fail. Shifting magic away from her scans would cause her to be unable to search for magical signatures. The concentration was arguably more important. Magic alone could not weave compulsions, and she had to believe what she wanted Harry to believe. Her magical range and resolution were both greatly reduced, and Gringotts was resistant to magical scans. The walls of the bank were natural magical barriers, strengthened by the wards. From experience, the serpent knew she could sense the living beings inside. She would just need to be closer. She took stock of where Harry was in relation to the building. They had crossed the street and were now walking alongside the building, on the pavement. Nahezra cursed herself. She had used a great deal of magic to get Harry this far. She put the magic back into the compulsions, and Harry's gait straightened out almost immediately. She took 2 seconds to further observe the threads powering her compulsions. Some of them were wearing thin. The compulsions and the magic threads from the serpent could be thought of as frayed wires, leaking magic into the atmosphere. Just then, in the few seconds she took to reapply Harry's compulsions, while she was not paying attention to the scans, 3 goblins came into her range. In her loss of concentration in correcting Harry's failed compulsions, she had stopped paying active attention to the magical pings she received. She could not be sure of when or in which order she sensed the goblins. Before she paused to help Harry, there were no goblins, and now, suddenly, there were 3. Nahezra cursed once more, stopping the wide magical scan at once, returning to a magically inert state, and using only enough magic to keep the compulsions alive and her limited queries into Harry's condition. She cursed her impossible situation, but she thought very carefully about the timing. She estimated she had detected the first goblin 3 seconds after she stopped paying attention to her scans. With a jolt, she noticed Harry was preparing to enter Gringotts. There would be no more magical scans other than the very short-ranged scans for Harry. There would be no more massive swings in magical energy from the serpent. She had a large pool of uncommitted magic since she had cut her scans, so she prepared for Gringotts in a genius way. She dumped magic into her intrinsic magical stealth abilities, leaving a healthy reservoir for Harry's compulsions. Upon entering the bank, she believed there was a tiny, almost minuscule chance a single one of the 3 goblins could have sensed her before she knew she sensed them. She estimated that maybe the closest of the 3 goblins could have a tiny hint about her presence, but not necessarily her current location or what she was. She knew her range was highly limited because of the compulsions, but she did not believe there was a single chance any goblin would have had enough time to focus on her signature. Nahezra could not have been more incorrect. The Gringotts goblins were very sensitive creatures, both spiritually and magically sensitive. As Harry Potter drew closer to the bank, Nahezra entered each goblin's magical detection range. They sensed the unholy presence walking towards the bank. The air became heavy. The stench of magic from the serpent was overpowering. The professional goblins focused on their duties, ignoring the abomination coming closer to them. Nahezra was not completely incorrect in her assessment. She was of a higher order than the goblins, and in all normal cases, she would be able to sense goblins before they could sense her. even bolstered by the magical walls and wards of the bank, even if each goblin actively searched with their magic in the same way Nahezra did. However, her sense of scale was completely off within Harry's cloak. There was no easy way for the serpent to identify ranges, and her own range was determined by her own ability. If she was not currently running dozens of magical threads, each with its own cluster of compulsions, and if she did not constantly check Harry for signs of exhaustion, the goblins would have no chance of finding her before she could find and identify each of them. She was fatigued, expending far more magical energy than she had in decades, and concentrating on too many things at once. Each of the goblins knew what she was, where she was, and what she was doing. What she was doing was most curious to them. The goblins felt the monstrous presence disappear entirely, like it was never there. Not 10 seconds later, a single wizard walked through the Gringotts' doors. He set off silent alarms for alchemic potions, and they detected the use of image manipulation potions. Harry took 12 total steps before Nahezra told him, her voice ripe with anger. "Harry, there is a goblin looking at you, over to our left. He is waving at you. We must follow him." Unfortunately for Nahezra, the goblins identified her before they even made it to the bank. Chapter 25. Terrible Tantrums. Nahezra's decision to hide herself from the goblins was brilliant and done only out of love for the wizard. She needed Harry Potter to stand on his own, and she needed Harry to attract the attention of Gringotts without her drawing eyes to the both of them. The goblins needed to respect Harry, but not fear the great serpent. Sadly, the great serpent noticed immediately that the goblins spoke at Harry, viewing him as another one of her disposable pawns. Gringotts, the goblin bank, had a branch in every nation. Each location had its own stored items, and the contents of its vaults could be transferred to other locations for a hefty sum. Upon Nahezra's arrival in Gringotts, the goblins had to transfer one of the most high-risk, highly valued items in their storage. The object, transferred from Albania to England, was known only as Bowl. The Gringotts inventory manager for the English bank prepared for the meeting of their few non-human bank users with uncertainty. Master Matthew Pinwater was one of the few humans currently employed in the English system. Gringotts was an equal opportunity establishment, and his mastery of charms was well suited to his current position. The day started like any other for the inventory manager, behind a desk, reading vault reports and keeping track of attempted thefts across all its branches. He heard the commotion from his goblin co-workers as they complained about the appearance of an unclean presence within the bank. The wizard simply put it out of his mind, believing it to be yet another half-vampire making a deposit. It was not usually his job to appraise and check for damage caused by the storage system of Gringotts. There were several lower-level goblins in charge of the day-to-day operations, but this singular object she wanted was special. Something the other goblins wanted nothing to do with. The master was perfectly happy to step in. He was curious about what a centuries-old serpent could need so badly. Several hours of a very angry great serpent hissing, loud enough for the patrons within the main bank to hear later, the object arrived. The master immediately knew the goblins were right about the unnatural nature of this object. He did his job, ignoring the way the other goblins shrank away from the object. There were many objects enchanted to ward off wizards, but he never felt such an evil, all-encompassing sensation before. Its presence made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The serpent had not a nut to her name. Her wealth was in the form of highly enchanted sacrificial objects. Among these items was her bowl. To the goblins in Albania who had possession of the bowl in their vaults, it was one of the foulest objects, an abomination that should not be allowed to exist. Funnily enough, the Gringotts goblins had the exact same opinion of the serpent. Nahezra's bowl was her first possession. She had known it was hers, and had it since she first knew herself. For nearly a century, for the first 100 years of her life, it was her sole possession. It was the only thing she considered worth protecting, and it was the only friend she had. The serpent simply described it as a bowl. She never answered any questions about the item. Not a single question asked by goblin appraisers over centuries of interactions with the serpent was ever answered. The serpent used accurate and meticulous language for everything except the bowl, constantly over-explaining and describing her stored objects with verbose language. This clearly obsessive level of attention led her to record every nick and dent in her many sacrificial knives with extreme detail. Yet, this obsession didn't carry over to the bowl. Her description of it was vague and extremely misleading. Bowl, a round golden object I eat from. The English Gringotts manager agreed with the report on the serpent. The object they had to magically heft into the bank was indeed not accurately described. They had modified several doors to allow the bowl entry, and the manager himself thought it looked more like a vast bathtub than a bowl. It looked like a bowl for giants, to the manager, clearly too large for the serpent to eat from. The master was unaware of the meaning of the word eat. The goblins were not. The object Nahezra described as a bowl was, in truth, a ritualistic basin composed entirely of elemental gold with several unknown enchantments laid upon it. It was undoubtedly the single strangest thing the goblins had encountered. Looking at the strange object, the human thought it was very poorly described. This item had existed within Gringotts' network for centuries, and yet no goblin found it important enough to describe the almost liquid nature of the object. The master walked closer to the bowl, bending over to admire the exquisite golden shine and the constantly shifting sigils that appeared on the bowl's outside. On the inside, the bowl was unmoving. The gold had static, distinct engravings. The molten metal flowed in gentle but chaotic ripples across its surface. Delicate sigils etched into the metal darkened and began to blur, only to be slowly washed away by the flowing gold, leaving no discernible trace behind. The sigil's faint outlines would momentarily linger before dissolving into the shimmering gold, only to reappear elsewhere in a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. The manager rubbed the liquid side of the bowl, noting and recording the way it firmed to the touch and returned to a semi-fluid state when he pulled away. He ignored the growing tension and returned to reading the report. If there was one thing he could count on, it was the numbers. The weighing and measurement of an object were done and recorded automatically. The manager read the first line. The mass of the bowl can be rounded up to 700 kilograms. The manager could not believe what he was reading. The words "can be rounded up" were obscene. He could barely believe this was an official Gringotts transcript. The bowl is hemispherical in shape, supported by 6 legs. Magical analysis cannot identify the enchantments, their purpose, or the creator of the object. The inventory manager glanced over at the massive tub, which took up most of the room. He noted that the tub seemed larger, far more imposing than it did earlier. Suddenly, he heard a coarse, head-splitting hiss behind him. He turned on a dime, looking directly at the serpent from the dossier. The green-suited man felt a fear he'd never known before, staring at the serpent's immense bulk. He felt as though the serpent looked through him at the bowl behind him. The serpent ignored him. He got the extremely strong feeling that the serpent did not care about his existence and was merely admiring the bowl. The serpent ignored him. A few seconds passed, and the serpent did nothing, looking through the man. He had a very strong feeling that the serpent found him annoying and would rather he remained quiet. He still had years of training under his belt, and he could not allow a client to go ignored. "Miss Nahezra, I am currently app." The serpent hissed once more, another assault on his ears and mind. The Gringotts employee was right. The great serpent was not interested in him and cared little for his existence. His speaking drowned out her conversation, and that conversation was far more important than his life. Her hiss was directed to him now, the first time the great serpent addressed him directly. The great serpent used a negligible amount of her magic. The directive was clear. "If you speak, you die." The serpent's gaze locked onto his. Finally, Nahezra looked at the wizard before her. The man's hindbrain sounded the alarm, drowning out years of training in customer service. His rational mind, normally in control, was overruled by a primal imperative to flee or submit. The serpent's unblinking stare seemed to amplify this instinctual response, rendering the man mute. Unable to articulate a response, he fled, sprinting full tilt down the hallway, wishing to avoid death by any means. 20 minutes later, The Gringotts inventory manager still sat trembling in fear at his desk on the higher levels. Silent sobs racking his frame, he still heard the threat. The hiss was overpowering. The serpent's curse was overbearing and noticeable to the magical creatures near him. The goblins avoided the crying, sobbing wizard, for they saw the ichor of her magic clinging to him. He was touched by something foul. Her magic screamed at theirs. The wizard had ignored the screams from his subconscious while appraising and being near the object. He could not, however, ignore those same screams when the serpent found her way into the collections room. The strangest thing was the serpent. He had self-warded the collections room. When objects of high value were not in the vaults, the warding was always done from the inside. Only he could control who entered or left. Furthermore, each bank prevented clients from entering staff areas. Ancient, thousand-year wards prevented clients from leaving their designated areas. There was no possible way for the serpent to have entered the collections room. His first instinct was to confront the client and guide them away from unsafe areas of the bank, but he grew queasy at the mere thought of being near her. Master Matthew Pinwater made several calls, one to St. Mungo's, and subsequently cleared his schedule for the week. The strangest thing, however, was the latest entry, one he had never made, yet which bore his signature. Magically signed, magically sealed, and just as vague and imprecise as every other branch's entry. The serpent intentionally falsified records to keep the exact nature of the bowl unknown. She was unconcerned about a goblin trying to steal gold and modifying the weight of the bowl. The bowl gave anyone nearby the unsettling feeling of being watched. This effect encompassed everyone: muggles, mundane animals, magical creatures, and magical spirits alike. According to their testing, everything except Nahezra had a natural aversion to the bowl. There was no magical explanation for this sensation. The bowl itself was not inherently magical and possessed no discernible magical signature. The goblins, in their attempt to stop this effect, studied it. Every goblin, regardless of their awareness of the object's nature or the vault's contents, instinctively avoided the floor the bowl occupied. The goblins who studied the bowl found some interesting data. Test subjects were immediately aware when they were on the same level as the bowl, even when they had no idea which floor they were on. These tests were conducted blindly, dozens of times. Without fail, humans and goblins knew when they were near the bowl. The great serpent was an unnatural, unholy abomination, known by her name across multiple nations. To be near the serpent was to feel unclean. The sharp instincts of animals compelled them to flee. Magical creatures felt the presence of the great serpent. Once again, even if the serpent was actively hiding her magical presence, being near the serpent evoked feelings of terror. Again, there was no magical explanation for this feeling. The serpent knew of this effect she had on inferior beings, often forgetting its potency. She simply overlooked the devastating impact of her mere existence on lesser creatures. Had she remembered, she would not have spent so long trailing Eisen in the forest. The small snake believed he was being watched and reacted to every snake he smelled near him, regardless of how foreign the scent. Had the serpent remembered, Eisen would have died far earlier, minutes after she found him. The great serpent was unique in that she was the only known serpent who claimed to be descended from a demon. She was the only serpent who addressed others as lesser serpents, and Nahezra was the only serpent others referred to as the or a great serpent. Very powerful magical snakes and other serpents corroborated her story of being the sole descendant of Nahezral. The master read this within the St. Mungo's ward. Hours later, he still felt the serpent's unholy nature clinging to him. Somewhere within the dossier, the writing turned from analytical to almost fanatical. Pages and pages about the unnatural nature of the serpent and the increasing hostility they felt towards the serpent and the accursed objects she made them carry into her vault. The master, now wearing the St. Mungo's uniform, prepared for a long stay within the ward. When Nahezra entered Gringotts, she was unusually docile when she was extracted from Harry. Only after her true identity was identified and she was escorted into a secured Gringotts client lounge did the trouble start. Nahezra began shrieking, throwing a temper tantrum the goblins had been warned she was prone to. The goblins entered with their hopes high. The serpent slithered lazily on the floor next to her tub, which a house elf was currently filling with liquid. The great serpent Nahezra eyed a snake far larger than herself on the other side of the room. The snake was an unnatural color, bright blue, and looked like an oversized king cobra. The snake towered over the serpent, coiling its immense body several times to fit within the same room as the goblins and Nahezra. However, the snake begged the goblins, pleading with them not to make him address her by name. The goblins, magical creatures themselves, could not understand the snake's limited explanation of Nahezra's nature. This had nothing to do with the laws governing magical creatures. This was simply a matter of personal pride. They existed in a world where magical creatures were seen as just another of their kind. They would not dishonor a magical creature by referring to them as anything less than their name. Only the sounds of the elf filling Nahezra's prized possession echoed through the room. The serpent said nothing to the two goblins, ignoring them just as she ignored the lone house elf and the Gringotts wizard from earlier. The serpent looked away from the snake. A previously undetectable weight lifted from the snake. It realized the serpent had given it permission to speak, and so it began. The goblins listened very carefully, as though they could understand the words of their vault sentry. Greetings. I am a vault sentry, created by Gringotts to secure high-security vaults. I have been enchanted with the ability to speak since I was a hatchling. Due to your unexpected arrival, I have been sent here to facilitate communications between me and yourself. The lazy slithering of the serpent ceased. Her massive head rose slightly. The constant flicking of her tongue paused. She sensed the unnatural, almost human tremor in the word yourself, and noted the stress the snake felt. Nahezra listened intently, deciding how she felt about being addressed as yourself by an inferior creature. In the past, communication between Gringotts and you, our client, have been limited. I have been sent to rectify this. Nahezra remembered her previous Gringotts trip. She thought the system of speaking at their magical parchment was perfectly all right, certainly better than this snake who refused to use her title. The creature was a magical golem, an object to be seen and not heard. It was inferior, yet it had addressed her with a term meant for its own kind, a term that held no reverence. She did not say anything, listening to the nervous snake. On behalf of Gringotts, we hope your transferred object has been to your liking. I have come with our head healer to further discuss the boy's treatment. Please, if there is anything you wish to say, you can speak to me, Nahezra. As the snake anticipated, the great serpent reacted quite poorly to being called by her name. Once again, the patrons downstairs and the staff above heard the snake begin making very credible threats. Two goblins ignored every instinct to flee as the serpent hissed angrily, scaring their bright blue security snake. It was a promise of magical annihilation aimed at their bright blue vault sentry. The goblins watched their security snake shrink further and further away from the frustrated great serpent. The goblins secretly hoped their snake would consume the much smaller serpent and release Nahezra's hold over their establishment. The great serpent was angry, but still within the correct frame of mind to push her orders into the snake's mind. The highly magical snake resisted the mental intrusion out of instinct, not aware of the source. The source of those orders made herself known, burning them into the snake's mind instead. Nahezra's orders were costly and very precise. They kept her informed, as ordered, using the snake as a communication method. The goblin communicated in English, and the snake relayed her words back. The serpent made her priorities brutally clear. She refused all reports or communication not explicitly concerning Harry Potter, her massive head swiveling away with a deliberate slowness whenever the goblins dared to broach their own needs or concerns. She simply did not care. Nahezra's focus remained solely on enjoying her next few days in Gringotts, her mind already consumed with intricate plans for Harry's future in London. On the final day of her stay within Gringotts, the serpent rested in ultimate comfort. The obsidian serpent lay immersed in a red, pungent liquid contained within her bowl. A hand reached out towards the serpent, clutching a small, still-wiggling rodent. It offered the morsel to the serpent's wading maw, then dipped into a silver bucket, re-emerging with another. Two pairs of hands slowly rubbed and massaged the serpent within her comfortable, soothing bath of expensive Garblen wine. The serpent applied pressure to a notch within the bowl, deforming the soft gold and heating the wine bath. The house elves in charge of music changed their tune, switching to a slightly faster-paced symphony. The three elves, one playing an enchanted flute, another a majestic harp, and the final a piano, played as if their lives depended on it. Over the 5 days of her stay, the reports from the Garblens came rolling in. She was most interested in learning about the Potter family Harry came from. She expected a very impressive family, and she was not disappointed. The Garblens confirmed Harry's lineage. The Potters were a very well-respected pure-blood family. The serpent was unable to get a full account of Harry's inheritance, nor was she permitted to access any vaults belonging to the Potter family. She pored through everything she could about the death of the Potter family and Harry Potter's role in defeating Lord Voldemort. This changed her entire plan for Harry, moving the timeline of various threads. All was fine until she wondered more about Harry's mother, by all accounts a spectacular witch, but without a recognizable family name. It was there that the serpent received her first bit of bad news. Nahezra learned about Harry being a half-blood. The Garblens tried to explain that the expense required to fake the blood status of a wizard of Harry Potter's fame would be incredibly high. Indeed, the serpent could not find a single harder person for whom to disguise blood status. Harry Potter's mother was the idol of Muggle-born wizards everywhere. To come out years after her death and publicly claim that every test taken previously was incorrect would be the absolute height of foolishness. The serpent could not believe for a second that the Garblens were correct regarding the social status of half-blood wizards. In her and the Garblens' realm, being a half-blood or half-mundane was a death sentence. To magical creatures, this was their form of a squib, and the serpent was not able to accept that her Harry was defective in any way. Inferior translator Snake, you will hear and relay my words accurately this time. Tell that foolish goblin that I do not care if humans think being half-blood is perfectly acceptable. I do not care that humans do not consider being called a half-blood an insult. From this moment on, Harry Potter is a pure-blood. I do not care how you make it happen. I do not care how many inheritance tests you have to fake. I do not care how many newspaper articles you have to take out. After a day of frantic deliberation, much of which was spent requesting all known documentation about Lily Evans, the Garblens believed they had a possible plan. It was not magical in nature, essentially boiling down to throwing money and lawyers at the problem. The Garblens explained their plan to change Harry's blood status, but the serpent no longer had time for their words. She instructed the Garblens to make it happen without informing her. As the Gringotts delegation left, her thoughts turned towards the new pure blood. Clearly, he had potential, strong magical potential, with a very keen appreciation of knowledge. He loved learning and loved asking questions, simply to know more. She estimated that she could not have asked for a much better wizard to be a true speaker. The truth was that she would have stayed with any true speaker. They were so rare. The serpent was certain Harry was destined for greatness, even before he was fortunate enough to meet her. This was a strange experience for her, to have someone she considered an equal. Harry never questioned her, never pushed back against her ideas. She was perfectly fine with this for now, but she wasn't ignorant of her own nature. There were things only Harry could understand. She hoped, when the time came, that he would have the backbone to ignore her, even if she was unable to understand his logic. She hoped this erasure of his mother's brilliance, despite being limited, was not the first time he stood up to her. She knew she was overstepping her boundaries. She knew Harry may possibly have a problem with this, but she hoped Harry trusted her enough to know it was for the best. It was far easier to make valuable friends once you were part of the ruling class. As part of her instructions, the Garblens were ordered to find a pure-blood home for Harry Potter. From her discussions with the Garblens, a pure-blood lord was eager to meet Harry Potter. They described him as ambitious, cunning, and one who recognized talent. Nahezra was impressed with his accolades and used Gringotts as a proxy for their communication, using the electric blue snake to transcribe her words and the Gringotts seal to authorize their communications. The serpent worked to improve Harry's social standing, and the pure-blood lord felt the shifting of power. Nahezra had a wonderfully relaxing week within Gringotts. She knew from Goblin reports that Harry had the same. According to the reports, Harry spent his entire week asleep. It was time for the next step in Harry's journey. The serpent pressed a previously unused node within the bowl. The liquid magically drained itself. The elven hands immediately moved away from the serpent. They returned with soft, silk towels, drying the serpent with utmost care. The elves watched in hidden fear as the serpent slithered free from their hands and out of her bowl, landing on the floor with a sickening splat. They did not feel the serpent release her hold on their magic, so they remained, unable to follow their orders to leave when not actively performing a task for the serpent. Soon, she felt her favorite human walking towards her room. In a gesture she would kill anyone else for, the boy walked in without knocking, looking at the serpent on the floor and the house elves attending her. Time slowed for the serpent. Rage became replaced with love, and almost immediately, every elf in the room felt the pressure rise then disperse. Harry was completely unaware of how much his lack of manners angered her, and he simply smiled at the serpent. Usually, the serpent would respond, but she was critically fixed on Harry, checking him for any of the problems Gringotts mentioned. This was her first time looking at Harry Potter that week. He had spent the week resting and recovering within the Gringotts infirmary, and she noted that the goblins were mostly successful in returning Harry's natural looks. Harry wore green leather boots, with red laces down the front. Nahezra sensed the heavy enchantments on the boots. They were heavy-duty combat boots with anti-slip enchantments and a myriad of spells to improve his balance and cushion his feet and joints against extreme weight. His cloak, also Gringotts green in color, was similarly enchanted and had her custom specifications. Harry's eyes were green, much like hers. Nahezra found it captivating. She didn't believe in fate in the same way humans considered it, but she was starting to. Her eyes and his were very similarly colored. She could not identify a difference between the two shades, only in their intensities. Her green was vibrant, unnaturally bright, and something that sometimes alerted prey to her presence. His hair was strange, and she understood what the goblins meant by complications. The potion made by Raken, designed to work on activated magic, had met a wizard far more powerful than the potion's master anticipated. As a result, the brew became wildly overactive within the young wizard's body. Half of Harry's hair, the hair on his right side, was a shocking, shimmering gold. The hair on his left side was his natural, deep raven, creating a stark, unsettling line down the center of his head. She noted how naturally Harry moved. It appeared as though the potion could not change the young wizard's body. His weight clearly felt natural for him. He moved as he always had. His lack of embarrassment and the relative calmness the goblins described confirmed another theory of hers. Raken's potion changed the way Harry thought he should look. A mental as well as physical change, designed to help a wizard adapt to their change in looks. Harry simply woke up, looked in the mirror, and was perfectly fine with his hair. When Nahezra heard this report from the goblin medics, she did not understand what it meant for half of Harry's hair to be a different color. She simply ordered the goblin medics to try to resolve the issue and hide evidence that his hair color was tampered with. The medics in charge of Harry clearly failed. Harry walked over to Nahezra, casting a sideways glance at the trio of elves playing music before the serpent. He thought the entire scene was quite strange. The pair observed each other, the first time either of them saw each other in a week. The first thing Harry noticed was how awful the trio of elves was at playing the instruments. Harry was not a music expert by any means, and while the elves looked proficient at playing their instruments, they played without rhythm or harmony. They were essentially making noise, and Harry could not bear another second of it. Nahezra, how could you like this music? They're just making noise. Serpent and the elves were not able to understand the concept of harmony. The music sounded perfectly acceptable to them. To Harry it sounded as if three toddlers were experimenting with the sounds. Nahezra was perfectly content with her music and was willing to turn this into a teaching moment, explaining to Harry that magical creatures and humans saw the world in many different ways. However, she felt it was more important to get Harry used to her abilities and the very nature of death. The three house elves died right in front of Harry. The two behind the snake, next to the bowl, shifted nervously. They were still bound, and they got the distinct feeling that they were next. Nahezra observed the reaction of the boy, every possible physical and emotional reaction from the child. His face first betrayed his shock. With her flawless memory, she was able to notice the minute changes. She saw the shock, but there was no fear. Harry stepped backwards from the 3 dead elves and looked at the serpent. "You did not have to kill them. You could have ordered them to stop." Harry's voice was even but accusing, a very cold-hearted response to the death of 3 elves. The serpent noticed the very subtle reaction to her magic from the boy. She knew in that moment that Harry sensed the small amount of magic required for her to kill the 3 elves. Nahezra lazily sampled Harry's magic from across the room. The boy kept his magic focused instinctively, something younger wizards struggled with. The great serpent never observed Harry doing accidental magic, but she knew it was a possibility with the way his magic flared. "They do not understand me. Killing them was easier than summoning an attendant. Still, they did not have to die. You held them here somehow." The serpent loved the steel in his voice, the patient and subtle anger. Harry Potter was not afraid of her. This was the boy she could work with. She needed more of this. He was confident and assertive in his words, but she sensed no malice or hatred. She needed another test, a test in identifying magical signatures and the disappearance of magical signatures. She allowed the elves to run, keeping a close watch on Harry's magic. The 2 elves felt the subtle release on their magic and took the opportunity to flee, abandoning the towels and teleporting away. The serpent wanted this, using their sudden disappearance to test if Harry could sense their deaths. Magic called to magic, and Harry's magic seemed sharper, more refined. The great serpent's understanding of human magic was quite limited, but she suspected Harry had become much better at focusing during his week resting. She sensed the current location of the 2 house elves. They moved to the floor above them. She became excited when the elves stayed within a close distance. She knew Harry should be able to sense the staff floor. Before the 2 perfectly dry towels hit the floor, the 2 elves died. They died within the Gringotts house elf dorms, surrounded by dozens of their kind. "Nahezra, you should not have killed those 2 either. They were afraid of you. That is why they ran." Harry said this without anger, explaining to the serpent why the 2 elves had fled. The boy knew the serpent was a predator and believed her natural response was to attack a fleeing animal. He was unaware that Nahezra gave him a test she did not believe was possible for him to complete. He became quite attuned to the serpent's mannerisms in a short amount of time, and the serpent had a very distinct reaction when something unexpected happened. "Killed who?" "The 2 elves with the towels. They ran, and you still killed them." Nahezra didn't give a response. Her immense form remained utterly still. She was truly and deeply puzzled about this. She was unsure of how to process Harry's words. She was, of course, aware of the concept of mercy. She was, of course, aware of such a human weakness. She was not confused by what Harry said. She was confused by what the boy was able to do. Harry was correct about the great serpent's confusion. In those moments of silence, she tried every possible explanation for Harry's ability to identify the 2 deaths amidst the errant signatures of other house elves. Her mind, a vast and perfectly accurate library of magical theory, found no other explanation. There was no possible scenario in which Harry did anything other than magically sense their deaths, a feat she didn't believe possible for such a young wizard. Shock immediately turned to admiration. Harry Potter was gifted and came from a gifted family. She had expected that kind of precise magical resolution to come only after months, perhaps years, of grueling imaging training. The serpent prepared to praise Harry for his ability to pick out 2 elves from a room of 100. She prepared to tell the boy that that kind of magical and mental focus was beyond the possibility for a young wizard. For any wizard, Nahezra corrected herself. The ability was far beyond the possibility for any wizard. This feat was not possible for any wizard anywhere at any time. It was simply a trade equals off humans made. Sensing the magic of a house elf was trivial for the most powerful of wizards, a level Harry would have achieved with or without her guidance, she was sure. The brains of Nahezra and Harry were vastly different. She was a predator by nature. She was naturally suited to identifying prey. Harry did the exact same type of magical reconnaissance she did outside of Gringotts, and this was impossible. There were dozens of house elves, hundreds of human patrons, and an uncountable number of goblins. His problem wasn't magical ability. There were trade-offs everywhere, fundamental balances woven into the fabric of existence in all species, magical and mundane. Humans had a much more generalized grasp of magic and a more general ability for learning. She wouldn't expect a house elf to do what Harry did. She wouldn't expect a unicorn to do what Harry did. It might be possible for a human to identify the loss of a particularly powerful witch in a room of 3 weak squib wizards, maybe given hours. But that scenario would require an exceptionally powerful wizard who was deeply, intimately aware of the specific magical signature of that one witch, and crucially, had foreknowledge of the squib nature of the others within the room. That is to say, there would have to be some strong outlier and very few sources of magical noise. The serpent pondered over the implications of Harry's speed and ease of this ability. She highly doubted such a thing would be useful in any practical setting for the wizard. She immediately flipped her train of thought into some imaging trails. This ability was relatively unimportant, but could be nurtured to improve other magical talents. If maybe Harry could identify wizards from their magical signatures, she doubted the wizard was capable. Harry watched the perfectly still Nahezra. Never before had he seen her frozen for this long. She sat there, unmoving, for almost 3 minutes. The young wizard left the room to speak to the goblin attendant the serpent had tasked to him. 30 minutes later, Nahezra was still ignorant of Harry's departure, and in this time, admiration had turned to suspicion. That talent for magical focus was inhuman. Something was very wrong with her wizard. The frozen serpent evaluated every second of her time with Harry, checking for any hints she might have missed. In the tent, she knew he could sense magic. That was one thing. In the tent, she had radiated her magic outwards, helping the boy weakly grasp her power. She had no possible explanation for Harry's rapid growth. Rest and relaxation without the influence of potentially harmful, highly concentrated potions could help him physically. She hadn't trained the wizard yet. What was the cause of this inner focus? She supposed the boy grew this magical focus by being around a strong magical presence, but she immediately rejected that idea. Her magic was incompatible. The same feelings he had around the German witch or the cultist would never happen around her. The serpent had a tenuous grasp of time when she was lost in her own thoughts. The serpent remained frozen and dead to the world for hours, going over every second of every moment she had spent with the boy. Her memory was flawless. She remembered everything she could understand. By the time the serpent finished evaluating every possible cause for Harry's rapid growth and development, she noticed she was late for the meeting she herself had scheduled. With several commands engraved into the soft flesh of the snake's mind, she was reunited with the boy and kept a tighter magical focus on him. The padded coat worked perfectly well, and the goblins wished them a safe journey onward. Nahezra told the young wizard about the meeting, and the pair discussed their plan. Nahezra promised herself not to be caught out. She failed to hide herself from the goblins, but she would not fail here and now. Harry would be the forward-facing part of their duo. The boy wasn't capable of making his own decisions yet, but the Lord didn't need to know that. Unfortunately for Nahezra, the Lord was well aware of Gringotts' proxy communication services, having used them himself. Perhaps Harry did want to return to the wizarding world, and perhaps he did want success for himself. It was all possible. He, however, didn't believe for an instant that the son of James Potter would ever reach out to a Death Eater. He knew instantly that the boy didn't work alone. He knew there was someone, most likely a dark wizard, directing this series of actions. He saw it for what it was, precisely. The boy was Harry Potter. Gringotts didn't allow lies to be sent through their communications. The boy may even have been aware of the unsavory history of his father and him. Many things were omitted from the public record. Whoever reached out to him had reached out to the publicly known victim of the imperious curse. The fighting was far worse. A blood feud animosity still existed between the wizarding elite. Still, the communication seemed to predict this. Lord Malfoy stood up, swirling his drink, and walked towards the sounds of his family preparing for the trip to visit Harry Potter. The Malfoy family each had their own interpretation of the final letter they received from Harry Potter. The letter came in from a different sender, without a Gringotts seal or stamp. It gave them a strict time and place to meet, and it turned the family's expectations upside down. On his expensive table, surrounded by expensive furniture, this final letter lay prominent among them all. The pure blood had underlined and circled a specific line, the line that had kept him awake last night. I hope you would not be foolish enough to harm the next Dark Lord, one with the ability to speak to snakes and the support of an entire wizarding nation. Chapter 26, Goblin Medicine. So, you are some kind of celebrity within Gringotts. Something like that. I must stay with the Gringotts staff, but you must listen to them. Everything they do is with my explicit permission. I promise you I can fight my way out of this. We can just go back to Albania and find Raken. You are a very brave young wizard. In some years, I'm sure you could fight your way out of the bank. This was my destination anyway. I would have preferred not using their medical facilities, and I would very much preferred them treating you as the more important one of the two of us. Goblins are truly wretched creatures, and I'm certain they will ask sneaky questions to learn more about me. In your future, Harry, I want you to be the person everyone talks to. You will show these inferior creatures your power. Similarly to when Raken would mention Harry pursuing a potions mastery, Harry changed the topic. This was not the first time Nahezra offered to coach and train him into being a great wizard. He doubted it would be the last. She was far more persistent about Harry and his future than Raken ever was. Harry ignored the hint of venom in her words, asking the first question he wanted to ask, since the goblins gave them the escort. So, how does a snake have a bank AC? The great serpent interjected with a hiss. I am a great serpent, Harry. Please do not call me a snake. I have been meaning to ask, isn't a snake a serpent? Aren't they the same thing? The great serpent listened to that question. She remembered her time in the wilds of Albania, her centuries of life. It was strange how quickly her interactions with Harry Potter changed her outlook on life. There was once a time where all lives other than hers were irrelevant. It was strange how quickly she adapted to insensitive but truly innocent questions like these. While she loved Harry, the question still hurt. She simply responded in a curt but kind way. This was not the first time the boy asked a similar question. Serpents are of a higher order, but to your point, we are quite similar. Please, do not refer to me as a snake. Oh, how does a great serpent have a bank AC? Just serpent is fine, Harry. Once again, the great serpent had to correct Harry's usage of snake, then correct Harry's usage of great serpent. She began to wonder if a human was not as mentally well as she hoped when she heard the small, innocent noise she associated with a human chuckle. The game was up. The serpent caught on, and she called him on it. Harry laughed out loud now, drawing the eyes of the security goblins. He was proud that he got the serpent 4 times with that joke. The pair whispered in their unrecognizable language, flanked by goblins. That was the very last thing Harry knew until he found himself alone in a room. He felt the absence of the serpent, but could not remember what led up to this moment. He last remembered speaking to the serpent, walking down an endless hallway. Harry sat in a metal chair with very limited padding. The boy recognized this chair, and setting almost immediately. It looked quite similar to the outside of the counselor's office at his orphanage. He looked at the walls. They were not the royal blue of the real place, nor did they have the large, windowed walls the orphanage was fond of. The walls were instead a dizzying blend of white and black squares. The floors, the walls, even the ceiling, had the unceasing pattern of white and black. The room he was in defied description. As Harry looked around the room, the more the edges of the room seemed to blur and bend. Harry could not remember entering or leaving this room. He could not remember what the room looked like before he entered it. The boy thought the warping nature of the room was slightly strange, but from somewhere, a perfectly reasonable explanation popped out and soothed his concerns. The young wizard sat there politely, without considering moving or leaving, for an unknowable amount of time. The boy blinked, and he was somewhere else. Without knowing how or when, Harry entered another room. A serious wave of nausea followed, and he remembered this place. He would never forget the time spent here. Harry Potter was in the shack once again. The pungent but faint smell of aconite, the scent of the vast collection of French textbooks. It was a place he dreamed of. In place of the small tea table, Harry observed a large wooden desk with rich engravings and the Gringotts logo on the front. To Harry, in this strange, malleable reality, it made perfect sense for the counselor from his orphanage to sit within a thoroughly magical shack and sport the animated logo of a magical banking institution on her shirt. It made perfect sense for the woman who believed him mentally troubled. The woman who locked him away until he stopped telling others he could converse with animals, to now wish to speak with him while magical potions brewed in the next room. Mr. Potter, can you please tell me why you have chosen to disfigure yourself? Can you explain how you have changed your hair and eye color? The woman sounded and looked exactly the same as she did when Harry last spoke to her. The clearly fake red hair, the quivering jowls, the over-applied makeup. Harry's mind could find plausible explanations for all of this, but it could not change his words or feelings. He despised her and her actions. Harry's hands moved to remove a hood, only to find nothing there. He wasn't wearing the clothes he'd arrived in, but a green short-sleeved t-shirt and matching pants, the exact shade of the Gringotts logo. It is a long-lasting potion. The base is similar to the Polyjuice potion, but enhanced and modified, using a different reaction pathway and different active ingredients. He replaced the word reagents with different active ingredients. The potion here was nothing like the Polyjuice potion other than the effects. Almost every ingredient was restricted, and the final result was an almost perfectly undetectable form of the Polyjuice potion that could last for decades. Harry lied, convinced that the Muggle woman would understand magic and what the Polyjuice potion was. Alchemy is considered to be one of the darkest arts. It was almost as if the entire room contracted around Harry, the walls pressing inward, stealing the air from his lungs until his chest ached with claustrophobic pain. Everything became freezing. For an instant, Harry felt the cold radiating from the woman before him. This was how it felt to be isolated from the others. He recognized the growing helplessness, the unease, and the pain. The person before him was overwhelming now, the master of his destiny before he met Raken. The sacrifices involved in reagents, sacrifices of blood, and rituals of creatures are indeed dark, and this knowledge is restricted heavily in most of the world. However, our purpose here is not to discuss you. The room temperature surged back to normalcy, a comforting warmth returning to his skin. Harry felt like he could gasp in a full, unrestricted breath once again. Tell us a little more about the great serpent, Nahezra. Harry suddenly noticed that the woman spoke without moving her lips. He moved to respond, but somehow found that he was unable to. The landscape around the boy shifted, colors blended into an imprecise smear. Only the table and the two people in chairs remained in place. The nausea was back. The colors were blinding. Harry peeked at his counselor, her face impassive, utterly devoid of concern as his world fractured. The colors stopped. Raken's shack was gone. The air was stale. The boy felt neither hot nor cold. This room was strange. The wooden table was replaced with a metal one. Harry and the counselor sat in metal chairs, facing each other. The boy thought this looked awfully like a police interrogation room, again, with the glass missing. The room was uniformly metallic gray from floor to ceiling, a monotonous, unbroken expanse that offered no variation, no point of focus. Tell me about the great serpent Nahezra. In the few moments before Harry's brain was given an acceptable excuse for the odd behavior, the world changed once again. The Spartan room filled with golden-bordered images of the serpent. Each image was from a different angle. Some showed her lying within a large golden tub, and others showed her resting on a cushion. The images went on as far as the eye could see. Every surface was replaced with a picture of the serpent. Harry looked closer at the table before him. The borders of the pictures had smaller pictures inside them. He looked up, expecting the woman across from him to say something. Her face also had several varied sizes of golden-bordered images of the serpent. There was a single picture that took up the space on her forehead, a smaller picture that took up the space on her left cheek, and her chin was dominated by several very small images. It was too much. The excuses for the images, the excuses for the swirls of color, the excuses for the repeated dialogue. Harry's brain couldn't keep up with the rate of things breaking down, further slowing down other events, causing more malfunctions that excuses had to be made for, and Harry had to be compelled into believing. This vicious feedback loop stressed an already stressed organ. It failed to keep up. Harry felt a strange loss of balance. His lower back tingled, slowly becoming more intense. The tingling turned to active burning. There became sparks under his skin. The sensation grew in intensity until that pain was all he could think about. His muscles locked into rigid spasms, and he leaned all the way back in his metal chair. He convulsed once. His head struck the metal table, and the momentum carried him out of his seat entirely. His eyes, fixed and wide, stared upwards. The goblin healers watched the entire incident, calling an emergency meeting between the health and intelligence branches the moment Harry showed signs of distress. The intelligence goblins filed into the observation lounge, looking at two images of their subject. Two different magical monitors dominated the room. In one, Harry Potter was frozen in time, stuck in the midst of his seizure, staring at images of the accursed demon. In another magical monitor, Harry Potter was in a very deep, magically induced sleep, the state required for the type of investigation the intelligence goblins conducted. The child was post-seizure. Two goblin healers monitored him closely and kept a cooling pad on his face. Nahezra met the Gringotts chief of medicine directly and requested the most senior employee with the most knowledge about human biology. The chief of medicine appointed a goblin to the role of head healer for this instance. The goblin appointed to head healer was an upper management goblin, one with years of experience with humans. The head healer tasked a healer witch to work alongside him. The pair stood side by side within the room. The head healer and the witch led several goblin medics. The intelligence officers were completely ignorant about the problem of sticking a child in their latest toy. This was something the witch was eager to address. The head healer wrung his hands together. He took his chance in the break to speak to the congregation of goblins glaring back at him. The witch next to him was noticeably angry, but let the department head speak. The head healer started the very second the door sealed behind the last goblin. You security goblins have done it now, a human child. You used your framework on a child and gave him a seizure. The serpent gave no permission for this. I read your report. He's stable now. What's done is due. They're going to wage war for this if they learn the hand we played in this. The client is upstairs. She told us about his importance to her. We had very simple, very easy instructions to follow. You put him in a magical framework and interrogated him about the serpent. We asked one question, and the serpent. After we warned you about the unique circumstances of the wizard, the human mind is soft. It needs rest. You people put him in an elaborate scenario, compelled him to believe each step. This is all route. Stop interrupting. You kept pushing compulsions. I warned your department head 3 times. An uneasy silence followed. The universal fear of higher management permeated goblin and human society. The Gringotts head healer and the head interrogator both had people to report to. The head healer had very few interactions with the interrogator. The intelligence goblins all knew there would be another goblin named head interrogator at the end of the week after this incident. The single human healer they kept on their staff was not aware of this uneasy moment between the goblins, taking her time to add in a shrill voice. That's Harry Potter in there. We're in magical London, and we sent Harry Potter into a seizure. Do you know what he means to the people here? The head healer turned to the human, bowing her head to offer gratitude, then turned to the intelligence goblins. Listen, the client gave us the authority to bring in outside help from Gringotts on her coin. I'm taking her up on this offer. We don't need to involve the client, and I do not want to involve our head. I asked my staff, and they're all in agreement. We do not know enough about human injuries of the mind. Maybe if our resident human healer is willing to take over. The witch responded quickly, waving her hand and simultaneously shaking her head. No, no, by all means, bring an expert in on this. I know several highly qualified people. I have a more general skill set. The head healer continued. That's sorted then. I can't directly assist with the care of Harry Potter anymore. They want me upstairs. The intelligence and security branches both want a report about the cause of this breakdown. The intelligence goblins winced, unwilling to get involved with the security department. The head healer focused now on the isolated witch and went on, saying, I'm putting you in charge of Harry Potter's care. I'll still be the one communicating with the client. I'm sorry about putting this on you because you're a witch, but you're a witch. The medics down there have studied human treatment, but you've done time in St. Mungo's. It's my job to keep the client informed. I have a report due about the complications we have with cleaning his blood. I'll omit our incident with the patient for now. The head goblin walked away from the group, shaking his head. Get him stepped down, and we'll deal with any injuries. We can still salvage this. This can all be over by the time I have to give my next report to the serpent. After an unknown period of time to Harry, he was seated in the shack once more. The pain and fear of being paralyzed was gone. He was perfectly okay. The explanation came before he returned to the shack. Harry accepted his previous experiences as a daydream. The only difference was the person seated across from him. His mind told him he was speaking to a real, live goblin. His magic could not corroborate that story. The boy could accept a muggle, as his magic would have nothing to find there anyway. His magic reached for the familiar magical presence of another, and there was nothing there. The intelligence goblins had an excuse, a compulsion to feed the young wizard. The fact that Harry was not given excuses and compulsions to continue believing in their framework was not the biggest issue. Their biggest issue was the massive magical anomaly that they could not purge. The goblins were losing control of their own technology and made some last-ditch efforts to preserve normalcy for the human in their care. Such a thing was uncommon. They updated and refined their magical techniques. Due to the exotic nature of the magical era, the step-down process took much longer than expected. The goblins resumed Harry Potter's framework and prompted the central actor to speak. They knew the step-down process was going to be far worse than normal. They suspected that something was already loose in the staging area, and they had a very good idea about what that thing might be. When you wake up, you will be the only living creature within the room. Do not speak, even if you are spoken to. It is critic. What are you, when I wake up? Am I asleep or something? Harry Potter pinched himself, something he saw characters do on TV to check if they were awake. He felt the pinch. Everything up to that point felt real. Do not interrupt. There will be absolutely nothing within that room other than yourself. No Gringotts employees, no other living entities will be within that room. Anything that claims to be your serpent is not your serpent. I don't remember entering this room. Can you please tell me what's happening? What do you mean? When you wake up, you will have a message in your hand. You will read it and avoid looking around. Do not speak to the serpent. Do not look at the serpent. Simply turn your palms upwards, angle your head downwards, as though you are reading a book. The boy was very confused, more confused than he'd ever been in his life. Harry had no idea why he could not speak to or look at Nahezra, what it meant to have a message in his hand, or why the goblin was obsessed with the idea of Harry being asleep. The boy kicked his feet, feeling the slight pain as his shin connected with the metal bar of the table. He was certain he was awake. 32 minutes passed in the real world, but the transition was instant for the young child. Harry woke up with a start. He recognized the feel of the metal chairs from earlier, but it took him a few moments to figure out what was wrong. The young child noticed that he was unable to see anything, a completely foreign sensation. His eyes were closed, unable to open, but this was true blindness, the complete absence of all vision. The boy gasped, unable to trust his first thoughts. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of everything, then moved his hands from his lap slowly. He reached up, his fingers trembling to feel his face. His nose and lips were there, solid under his touch. but beneath his eyebrows, where his eyelids should have been, was only smooth, unbroken skin. At this time, Harry Potter was unable to think straight and unable to process anything other than the utter absence of his eyesight. The boy struggled to understand his current predicament. The usually calm and collected potions apprentice cracked under the various stresses and forgot the instructions he was given just moments before. Simultaneously, Harry Potter was assaulted on two fronts. An impressive and invisible magical force grabbed Harry's arms. The force applied was nearly bone-shattering, and the boy screamed as his hands were roughly wrenched away from his face, towards his lap. Then his head was pushed violently until he was no longer sitting straight and instead stared at his knees. A searing, unholy pain exploded in Harry's hands. Molten words were being drawn directly onto his nerves. He writhed, a silent, helpless scream trapped in his throat. Then a new, unbearable sensation began behind his blank, unseeing skin. He felt his eyeballs, cold and foreign, slowly, agonizingly, roll into their sockets, grinding with a faint, chilling friction as they found their rightful place from beneath the taut, stretched flesh that had covered them. The boy could only see the white skin of his hands this close. He saw the edges of his knees and the very dark floor. Red lights from outside of Harry's perspective washed over him every few seconds. The boy read the words, now able to tolerate the slowly weakening magical pressures upon his body. "We refers to Gringotts. You refers to Mr. Harry Potter. Mr. Harry Potter, as you arrived at Gringotts carrying an unusually powerful serpent and an unregistered wand, we initiated a non-invasive magical probe. Our systems indicated you did not exist in the eyes of any government, magical or muggle. This immediately alerted our intelligence division. Your peculiar magic then bypassed several other identification measures, previously considered foolproof. During our investigation within the framework, we learned of your upbringing and have cleared you of any suspicion or wrongdoing. We also identified the serpent to be a highly valued Gringotts client, the goddess, or Nahezra. This client has vouched for you and provided acceptable reasons for our initial inability to identify you. Your investigation and subsequent placement within our magical mental framework occurred after her identity was fully confirmed. The serpent made us aware of your condition, and our subsequent scans have identified several other mental and magical injuries she did not mention. Your mind sustained heavy damage prior to your meeting with our framework. You recently engaged in sacrificial rituals involving magical spirits without proper precautions. You also suffered direct interaction and contact with an unknown space during a tent collapse, and you've been exposed to the invocation of beings beyond your nature. We at Gringotts sincerely apologize for any adverse reactions our magic has had to the currently fragile state of your mind. When you look away from your hands, you may perceive things that are not real. The entity you believe to be Nahezra is not real. The true Nahezra has willingly accompanied us and awaits your safe return, unharmed. The great serpent you felt on your back is precisely how our magical mental framework recognized and rendered Nahezra. We apologize for potentially exposing you to such an unfiltered view of the great serpent's true form. We do, however, hope you use this opportunity to recognize exactly what you have allowed under your robes. Your memories of the great serpent reveals that she had indeed told you of her existence as a descendant of a demon. Gringotts accepts no liability and admits no wrongdoing in this matter. We officially attribute your mental instability and current state to your own numerous low-level rituals designed to boost your memory and mental acuity. Gringotts apologizes for any inconvenience and will offer you a gift basket upon your safe return to the public areas of the bank. Harry Potter felt worse for reading the message. The message was neatly cut, in blood, into the palms of his hand. His hands were forced together as though trying to cup water, reading the tiny, neat lines in his own palms. It burned, and every movement of his hand inflamed the tiny cuts more. Harry was utterly horrified. He'd never come close to the level of fear he now felt. He felt physically nauseous. He just wanted to be at the orphanage again, anywhere but here. The moment after reading about the nature of the weight on his back, Nahezra stopped being a comforting weight. The thing coiled around him was vile. It was coated in mucus, and his robes felt miserable to sit in. Harry knew the serpent had hard, dry scales, so he couldn't understand why they thought the serpent was constantly layered in a wet, foul liquid. Harry was not interpreting the words of the goblins correctly. This wet, foul liquid was not a physical thing. This was the way they saw and sensed Harry himself. The magic of the serpent was around and a part of him now. Interestingly, the serpent was far more powerful than the human wizard. In the same way Eisen was covered by Harry's magic, Harry was now covered in the magic of the serpent. This was an intentional thing done by the great serpent. The magic coating was fierce and screamed offensively towards everything able to sense it. Goblins were some of the few magical creatures, other than serpents or magical snakes, able to interpret the magic signals from the serpent. Harry Potter was magically unpleasant to be near the goblins. This was how the goblins felt around Harry Potter, and so this unnatural wetness and the absolutely indescribable smell permeated absolutely everything. The normally docile and still Nahezra only appeared that way. The truth was, the serpent was a living, breathing creature. The utterly revolting, twisting, and constantly moving imitation of a serpent was perfectly accurate. The serpent's movements were tracked and recorded under Harry's robes during their short time together within the bank. The intelligence goblins were very thorough with their studies of the serpent. Harry smelt the absolute worst stench he had ever smelt. It assaulted his nose and made his eyes water. The filth of the creature on him, twirling and churning over his body in a constant, undulating motion, and the smell of slime, rot, and decay was too much. Interestingly enough, the goblins believed that Harry Potter was compelled not to fear or feel the true, horrifying nature of the serpent, but this was not the case. The serpent and Harry shared a strong magical bond. Riding on a constantly moving and very talkative child was not very fun for the serpent either, but she wasn't compelled to enjoy herself. Somehow, magically, the pair just adjusted to the movements of their partner and learned to ignore them. There was no such reprieve here. The pretender under his robes had no such bond with Harry Potter. The goblins and Harry were unaware of the magical bond between them, and the serpent was only beginning to suspect its existence. The serpent felt very, very slightly weaker without the presence of the child, a strange feeling for the serpent as the boy actively drained her of her magic. Harry, without the serpent's bond, but with the full nature of the serpent, was overwhelming to say the least. Harry spread his legs and moved his arms quickly. The boy vomited on the floor. He had nothing to eat for days, and the acid burned his throat. The vomit splashed on his boots. The strong sense of wrongness of the floor, the smell and the texture of the creature on him made him nearly vomit once more. Harry closed his eyes and started to cry. Harry never cried, not when the orphanage locked him in a padded room for a week, nor during one of his dangerous potion mishaps. Harry bawled his eyes out. He screamed in hysterical sadness, calling out for someone, anyone, to help him. He called out for Raken, he cried out for Nahezra, he even called out for the dark wizard or his parents. In the end, he begged for someone to save him. After he had cried himself out, after he had screamed himself hoarse, no one came. He dared not cry out the name of the serpent. He simply ignored it. The serpent on his back hissed periodically, an unnerving sound that rattled his mind. He wanted to get the serpent out of his clothes and flee, but he was frozen there, and he was certain the serpent was the culprit. The serpent hissed less when he sat still, so Harry sat as still as he possibly could, dreading the next loud and overwhelming outburst from the creature on his back. The alarms were constant, too loud, but sometimes they served to drown out the serpent. Soon Harry's tired nature won. The serpent was not an active threat, and the room he was in was calming in a strange way. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, and magically, due to the constantly draining nature of the framework, designed for wizards twice his age. Chapter 27, Final Moments. The Gringotts' upper management was concerned to say the least. The vagabond boy with the obvious ties to various dark magical practices actually turned out to be a national hero. The mismanagement of the vagabond would obviously impact the bank financially. Gringotts has had its scandals over the years, and the goblin wizarding wars were kind to neither race. Indeed, if they had known who Harry Potter actually was to the people of England, the boy would have never been put within the framework. Unfortunately, the great serpent's attempt to hide herself behind the child failed. The goblins only cared about the serpent and failed to perform even the surface-level information gathering. The serpent had given the vault sentry the child's name and had warned the goblins about his unnatural standing within English magical society. The vault sentry was the first to notice the unnatural nature of the serpent's speech. Nahezra's words were difficult to interpret. She was a higher-level life form, and her words simply flew past the vault sentry. In the same way an ant could not begin to comprehend the words of a human, the vault sentry struggled immensely to comprehend her words. The strange, foreign stress she placed on the words boy or Harry were the only words he could comprehend naturally. When I speak to the goddess, she puts an unnatural emphasis on the word boy. Unnatural how? The goddess, her speech, she blends tenses. She speaks of the past, present, and future all at once. She speaks of the beginning and of the end. The serpent is very hard to comprehend precisely, even for short sentences. When she speaks of Harry Potter, whenever she references him, I know exactly what her words are. She uses magic to ensure I understand how much he means to her. Are you okay, Healer Carol? She cares for the boy. Her dossier says she eliminates inferior beings, and she thinks of all life as inferior. The goddess cares for nothing else. She loves nothing else. By her words, she believes Harry Potter to currently be her equal, and she believes he will soon be her superior. Bloody hell. Not 20 minutes after this conversation, and many hours after Harry's seizure, the head goblin argued with the head healer. At the same time, two witches watched over the peacefully sleeping child. Only one of the two witches, Healer Carol, knew the true cause of the boy's inability to wake up. This witch had spent years patching up auras after firefights. She was very good at hiding how nervous she was about the entire situation. Visions of a demonic, rampaging serpent swam through her mind. From all indications, she was simply unable to wake the child up. To muggles, this implied a serious medical issue, but with young wizards and witches, this was far more common. Magic is a strange and complex energy that surrounds everyone, while only a few are sensitive to it. There were stranger things that happened to young magicals all the time, particularly ones that were as powerful as Harry was. Her first steps after entering Gringotts and viewing her patient was routine. Healer Levine stood next to the sleeping boy, cautiously studying his strange hair. This was a classic sign of some magical anomaly within the patient, and her first steps were to identify and correct it. She slipped into analytical mode, identifying a potential clue to his current problem, but immediately slipped out of it. She began to wonder why she was treating this child, and not the Gringotts inventory manager. She was certain she would be rushed here to treat the near-catatonic Gringotts manager. Healer Levine double-checked with Healer Carol about the strange child being her patient. Healer Levine read the boy's write-up, noticing a very noticeable lack of information about the child's condition. A child that none of her identification spells worked on, a child who had obvious exposure to rituals, and a child that she was not allowed to report the existence of. The healer triple-checked with Healer Carol, asking once again if her talents would be best used on a child who was simply asleep. After the Gringotts, Healer assured her that Master Matthew Pinwater was already taken to emergency care. Healer Levine took her current task seriously. The healer's first instinct was to end the enchantment, which clearly changed his hair color. It took the healer several failed attempts of spellwork to figure out that half of his hair was simply golden. The witch quadruple-checked everything, unable to identify a spell, potion, or errant magical source that would change his hair. She even checked for muggle methods of changing hair color. She continued with her work, assuming that the hair color was not a sign of rogue magic. Healer Levine was involved in enough DMLE investigations to know what it meant when the words she just read slipped out of her mind. Whatever this child's deal was, he was a top priority to Gringotts. Most of his file was hidden. Only the details of his seizure, the nature of the magical sleep he was under, and his age were available to her. The healer had absolutely nothing to go off of. She was paid to stand around a sleeping child. Healer Carol. Yes, Healer Levine. Healer Carol peeked into the room, looking first at the witch, then to the wizard. This child is perfectly healthy. Our patient suffered a seizure several hours ago. Perhaps there's something to that. Healer Carol promptly ducked out of the room, avoiding any more conversation about the topic. Healer Levine, who opened her mouth to respond, closed it once again and drew her wand from her hair. She used a spell to identify previous medical spells cast on a target and identified the same comprehensive array of spells that she would cast. Healer Carol was not a fool. She knew the boy was healthy, and by extension, Gringotts knew the boy was healthy. Healer Levine did this for hours, feeling the tension from Carol increase. The boy seemed perfectly okay. There was no sign of brain bleeds, no sign of any physical damage to the boy's brain. Not for the first time, she wondered why the bank had requested her so urgently. Healer Levine sat next to the wizard while Healer Carol buzzed in and out, receiving information the other was not allowed to have. Healer Levine would often ask innocent-sounding but quite informative questions. Still, she was a healer, someone used to the field, someone who, when employed at St. Mungo's, was always one of the first to apparate when the DMLE reported an active crisis. This pressure was nothing to someone who was used to dodging spells and finding the nearest aura to stabilize. Unfortunately for her, Healer Levine was also a crisis triage healer, one who worked with Healer Carol. So, Healer Carol. Healer Carol poked her head into the room, looking at her colleague. What do you think happened to Grandmaster Doff? The strange disappearance of the Grandmaster and the unnatural circumstances surrounding the Albanian apothecary were a very contentious and ripe area for discussion for potions, masters, and healers alike. The case had captured the hearts and minds of the entire wizarding world. Healers and nurses were always giving their opinions, even when it was not warranted. Healer Carol immediately dropped her guard and gave her opinion in one of the few times it was warranted. It was that Master Raken, I'm sure of it. I wanted to ask you about Raken since you were the miracle worker with Aura Dawlish. Aura Dawlish said there was no concrete evidence linking Master Raken to the incident involving the auras. I'd trust him to publicly name his attacker. Healer Carol's voice took on a syrupy quality, a callback to the old days of gossiping at Hogwarts. Healer Levine knew she had cracked the witch now, the woman who would gossip even while dark wizards rained spells down. Oh, come on. You know, that's just DMLE talk. Rita Skeeter leaked that Susan Bones has been trying to apprehend Raken for months. It's just too bad the task force is taking so long to bring that monster to justice. I hope he truly did die and is not just on the run in Albania. Healer Levine was completely aware that the DMLE unofficially listed Raken as a suspect, but had no evidence to launch an official investigation. She was also aware that a team of Greek, German, and Russian auras led the manhunt for Raken in the Albanian wilderness. After so long without any word from Raken, she knew there was a limited chance he was alive. Are you going to tell me what I'm doing here? Healer Levine shoved the knife into the heart of the gossip-infused conversation, shocking her colleague into silence. She continued, filling the silence. You and I both know that we've been running the same tests and the same magical analysis spells. What are we doing here, Carol? Healer Levine's voice dropped, enticing and drawing out the open-hearted healer Carol to share. The Gringotts healer bit her lip, another of her tells, and said in a very small voice, Okay, this boy belongs to a very important client, one of the most important clients the bank has. Our job is to look over him. Nothing can go wrong. Healer Levine nodded and removed her wand from her hair in a very practiced motion. The other witch remembered that fad from Hogwarts. The sideways 8 wand movement was the same used by both witches several times. Do you care to elaborate on exactly what we're meant to be looking for? He is perfectly healthy. The seizure you reported had a magical cause and left no lasting damage. At this, the healer flicked her wand, ending the wand movement as the wizard's green status flashed across the conjured magical display. This boy is special. You don't know who this is. I can't tell you who this boy is, but he is a celebrity, and it's critical that we identify any mental complications. Yes, so special that my magic cannot identify him. A celebrity that never stepped into a wizarding hospital. Where was he born? He's not in the global medical database of wizards, Carol. Other than the fact that I cannot wake him up by any known means, he's perfectly healthy. What's going on here? This boy has been involved in rituals. You know we should report this. Healer Carol knew the boy was born in St. Mungo's, and she knew speaking about her inability to identify the wizard would point to more unsavory magical practices than low-level ritual work. She needed to hide the fact that a potion running through his blood made him far harder to magically identify. Carol remained quiet. Anything she said here could be bad. Chapter 28. Emergence of a Goddess. The pretender had no regrets for her actions. She had a goal. It may have been imposed by the framework, but it worked to further her own agenda. Harry had long switched past the point of being alive. The framework was created to be accurate to the real world. The pretender knew the nature of its existence, but it was still an accurate representation of the serpent. It had the abilities that Gringotts was able to confirm and document, and one of these abilities helped her in this moment. Harry Potter, within the dreamscape, had begun agonal breathing. His brain no longer received enough oxygen to continue. His body convulsed, a desperate, automatic spasm against the pretender, and from his throat came a series of rasping, guttural sounds. The pretender, feeling the life ebb from him, tightened its grip. It knew what it was doing. The serpent listened to the magic around the framework. In Muggles, the brain took over the active responses in trying to keep the body alive. The brain was by far the most greedy organ in any organism, willing to keep itself alive by any means necessary. Once more, the serpent prevented any oxygen from reaching the boy's brain, magically and physically suffocating the already panicking brain. The rasps grew louder, the spasms more frequent. The brain sent a number of frantic commands to muscles starved of oxygen. The brain's scream was not sound, but something far more ancient, a keening that existed in frequencies beyond the physical realm. This was the final stages of death for a Muggle. The brain threw a form of temper tantrum, demanding more oxygen, more time. In its final moments, the brain conjured memories of better times, the best memories of Harry Potter. The serpent felt the weakening spasms, heard the silent screaming from the dying brain, and felt the magic take over. Harry was not a Muggle. He was a wizard, and their stages of death were different. There was no textbook that would even hazard a guess at the nature of death in wizards. Magic took over from the brain, unwilling to allow a vessel to perish. No human could sense it. Very few magical predators were aware of this slight difference in magic surrounding a dying wizard. This ultimate magical signal was the one the pretender waited for. In this moment, the serpent allowed oxygen to travel through the blood-soaked boy. Harry Potter was gone. The brain was too damaged to recover, even with the unnatural assistance of magic. The pretender took advantage of Harry's lowered magical resistances to peek into the boy's memories. Simultaneously, she focused magic on the framework, looking for what she knew to be there. The first stage, Harry's death, was completed. The pretender felt the framework relax the magic binding her. She still had a long way to go to save Harry. Still, no doubts, no emotions entered the serpent's perception. The serpent sensed the magic listeners of the framework, small magical threads that waited for expected things to occur. One of these listeners focused on memories. She traced the magical pathway of this listener. The pretender knew that her existence was partially thanks to Harry's knowledge of the serpent being enough to give her form. This listener was critical, but inactive. The pretender needed this listener. She needed the framework to acknowledge the presence of his memories. The pretender was not clever enough to find an elegant solution to this problem, instead throwing magic into the inactive listener. Magic called to magic, and her magic screamed life into the Gringotts' intelligence framework. A single panel in the abandoned control room flickered to life. The pretender poured more magic into the listener. The barrier between false magic and real power buckled. The dim magical monitor grew brighter and brighter, making the abandoned control room glow with an ethereal light. The magical monitor lit the room up. The dark room was briefly lit up by a rectangular sun. The magical monitor overloaded, and the control room returned to its near-total darkness, with no intelligence goblins to note the change. The pretender noted the magical response from the listener, and while she was unable to determine the actual condition of the enchantment, she was content with it actually doing something. She had another plan if it showed signs of malfunction to throw more magic at it, but she focused on another problem. The framework controlled everything, including Harry's reactions and possibly his thoughts. She knew her thoughts were not compromised because she could identify the strange nature of the framework. She knew as much as Harry did. She remembered the seizure and how Harry's mind stretched and warped to ignore the horror he felt after he was free from it. It was entirely possible that her wizard would simply ignore her critical message. She knew she could never be the messenger. Even if she could speak to Harry, if she could communicate with him, there was no possibility in which she survived for the message to be sent. She had to ensure the message was sent and processed correctly by the young wizard. To facilitate this, the serpent reached out to the framework. Her search was not for a listener this time. These listened for the magic within the framework and reported what they found. She needed to find a source of magic, something that gave the room its properties. Unfortunately for the pretender, even Nahezra would be unable to find a source of magic in this circumstance. 27 panels, all except for the one displaying the results from her now protected listener, glowed with the intensity of the sun. The magical displays did not go as peacefully as the first one. A small fire started within the room, unnoticed by all except for the Gringotts wards that had been deactivated as part of the Gringotts investigation. The small blaze became larger. The pretender believed she was ready. She was about to create a goddess. In the second that the magic binding her fell, the enormity of what she had done hit her. The rapidly cooling piece of meat she crushed to death was in fact the strange boy she had met in the tent. This strange influx of foreign sensations filled a void that existed before, giving her whiplash. She remembered the clinical and frankly sloppy job she had done of eliminating the young wizard. She was no longer in a fog, trapped between the framework's orders and her own intellect. For the first time, her mind was not clouded. Sadness and regret were not native emotions to the pretender. She felt the closest thing to those two emotions as she could. She focused on her task ahead, pushing the feelings of loss and redirecting her attention from the victim of her savage attack. Harry Potter was still here. She had broken him beyond any hope of survival. There was still life within him. He was still aware of the things around him. The framework could not and would not allow death to occur naturally. The death of the mind and the cessation of magic would break the framework finally. The broken, bloodied piece of meat under her could survive in a better place than this. Only bringing the goddess to this imperfect and godless reality would correct things. The framework mirrored Harry's memories to create the pretender. The pretender intended to use the framework to create Nahezra from Harry's memories, freed from the unnatural Gringotts' influence. The memory of Nahezra within the tent was the purest memory Harry had. There were no compulsions for the framework to twist in negative ways based on her malicious usage of compulsions recorded in history. This was the first open meeting the pair had. The pretender, an incomplete shadow of the brilliant serpent, waited until the brain started replaying memories. Her hijacked listener worked exactly as she hoped it would. In the same way the room changed to Harry's memories, the room changed once more. No longer was there the ring of alarms or the strange, dark room. Harry was back in the shack in London, and the pretender watched, logging every detail of Harry's happiest memories. The pretender became prideful. She had experienced more of Harry's memories than Nahezra had. What was the point of being perfect if you weren't struggling with everything you had to keep the only wizard you ever tolerated alive? Harry Potter would survive this ordeal. He would leave this framework, and she would cease to exist. The pretender silently raged. It wasn't fair for Nahezra to benefit from her struggle. It was both one of her easiest kills on a magical and also one of her hardest. The pretender became aware of the unnatural emotions spiking within her. The framework had no control over her current thoughts or actions, but she was created to be arrogant, prideful, and stubborn. the natural traits of the great serpent Nahezra, but overtuned 100-fold. Thoughts of eliminating the memory of the real Nahezra, while appealing and very possible given her magical ability, did nothing to help the situation. The pretender saw Raken and Harry brewing dangerous and unstable concoctions with no safety precautions. The pretender saw Raken introduce Harry to brew more potions and watched Harry eavesdrop on the whispered argument. The pretender saw Raken brew a potion from memory, by name alone, and drink it without any testing. She felt the shock and fear Harry felt when the potion master coughed, and the elation Harry felt when Raken breathed fire like a dragon. Chapter 29. The Perfect Deal. The pretender was the last to emerge. A large golden bowl, her golden bowl, sat in front of her. The shadowy hulk of a great serpent slithered for 2 beats before noting the other creatures within the room. 3 house elves and a goblin surrounded the bowl. The pretender had the benefit of the Gringotts' dossier to recognize the Gringotts' hospitality goblin in charge of her visit. The house elves and the goblin were unmoving. No magic interacted with their still forms. Each of the 4 figures had no eyeballs, their mouths were open, and their teeth were removed. These unblinking, unmoving vessels had an ethereal white glow coming from their unnaturally contorted faces. The pretender had an extremely good idea of where she was and what was happening. The pretender was filled with fear. Immediately, she coiled inward in a most undignified manner, a motion and posture that the real Nahezra would rather die than take up. This was who she was fearful of. Her predatory nature made her keenly aware of the other 2 living beings in her vicinity. She really is hideous. This is the one you called the pretender. Indeed, she is a cruel mockery of us. The pretender in that moment wished for death. A whisper, a low, smooth sound like rustling silk, seemed to come from everywhere at once. It spoke of a mockery of something hideous, but it was not directed at her. It was as if she were a piece of furniture in a room, the object of a cruel discussion. Her goddess called her hideous, and the memory of her goddess agreed. For the pretender, the 4 figures disappeared with the bowl, and 2 identical great serpents sat in 2 thrones. The pretender peeked over her scales at the 2 great serpents, drinking in their physical appearances. The 2 serpents sat in 2 identical thrones made of gold and rich red cushions. The pretender looked at the 2 perfect greater serpents in fear. The pretender immediately knew that this imperfect specimen was far superior to her in every way other than magically. She also knew that this imperfect specimen was the serpent she helped to conjure within the framework. She was not the real Nahezra. She was inferior compared to the perfect goddess who occupied her own throne. Both serpents looked down upon her, but the pretender's attention was drawn to the one that reeked of goblin wine. This one spoke in an obscenely cruel voice. The pretender knew what she was in for. She is a cruel mockery of me. You are also hideous. The pretender felt the word mockery. The humbled pretender sank even lower in her coils, hoping to lose the attention of the 2 serpents before her. The memory of Nahezra, the one from within the framework, took the insult from the great serpent Nahezra. The difference in the pronouns, the difference between me and us, was cruel. Both the memory and the pretender were hurt by the words of their goddess. The pretender felt a strange build-up of magic. It took her a split second to identify the cause, but when she did, she panicked. She could not have an outburst, not in front of the goddess. Sadness and pain were common for the pretender since emerging in this reality, and she tried her hardest to avoid this latest embarrassment. She could not understand the magical causes for her to still experience forced actions by external magical forces, but she could not control her outburst. Torment. The pretender asked only one question. Why was she being punished in this cruel fashion? Why must she embarrass herself before her goddess? The 2 serpents focused their senses on the incomplete serpent on the floor before them. They both heard the loud, booming voice of the pretender. How could they not? The serpent on the smaller, less important throne was eager to throw ridicule upon the pretender to gain praise from her superior. It is as I've said, the goblins have made this one defective. The great serpent Nahezra took great pride in dragging the already defeated, and broken down memory of her further. You yourself are horrible looking. You are just as imperfect and inelegant as the pretender. You are a pretender yourself. Never forget that. The memory of Nahezra, desperate to avoid the ridicule of her goddess, wanted to deflect the cruelty onto an even more helpless target. This was the basest of instincts, a lesson in social hierarchy that every creature, no matter how grand, understood. Even in a world of cosmic power, the instincts of the playground still applied. The memory in the throne looked away from the true serpent and cast a hateful glare toward the pretender on the cold floor. The memory shifted its weight, a subtle movement that mimicked the true serpent's own posture, and a silent, contemptuous snarl twisted its lips. It was an easy choice. The true serpent was perfection. It was an unattainable ideal. The pretender, however, was a grotesque shadow of what a serpent should be. The other two serpents knew the memory was hurting. They knew it looked to strike down to feel better. All three serpents had a very good idea what the next words would be. She is an imperfect amalgamation between Gringotts and a child's memory. I have your wisdom and knowledge, great serpent. Baal. Another, one of the most commonly heard vocalizations from Nahezra, replayed from the pretender. The imperfect serpent tried to coil inwards and physically muffle the hiss. It did nothing, but the great serpent avoided rebuking her. You are an imperfect memory. You have my wisdom, but very little of my knowledge. The pretender, the pathetic creature that coils before me, has none of my wisdom, but far more of my knowledge. The pretender was able to follow along with the thoughts of the other two serpents until this point. It was like having twins or triplets in this case. They were the same creature, just with different flavor. How can you say this? I am a memory of you. You are an outdated memory of me. I have grown in my time with Harry Potter. Pretender knew it was quite frankly, incredibly stupid. However, stupid was a relative term. The memory and the pretender both pondered what advantage of knowledge Harry Potter could possibly provide. From the way the great serpent was speaking, she believed the extra time between meeting Harry and now was some of the most transformative of her life. The centuries of life meant nothing compared to the time spent with the child. Neither of the two serpents could accept that this was the meaning of the great serpent. The memory pressed with another question, dispersing the rebuke of outdated from the air. So is this why I was within the framework? Did I succeed in taking Harry Potter to Gringotts? I did, not you. You are under the impression that we are one. That right there is the difference between you and I. You are a relic of the past who has fashioned themselves a throne. You are a memory, not real. You never had an encounter with Harry Potter. Goblin's deception. The pretender was too enraptured in the conversation occurring before and above her to notice or even try to hide her hiss. She was now more aware of her own nature than the memory of Nahezra. It was a strange and unsettling truth, how the pretender knew exactly what the memory was planning to do. The pretender could feel the memory's pain, a raw and agonizing thing that had nowhere to go. It was a wound that needed to be inflicted on someone else, a venom that had to be injected. The pretender appears to hiss every 30 seconds at an overwhelming volume. Is this how the goblins see us? Again, there is not an us. You are an inferior memory. However, you are correct. The goblins, to emulate speech, simply used their recordings of our speech and replayed the most common phrases. It is an inelegant but practical attempt, as in most languages and in most dialogues between friendly species, the most commonly used words are words of greeting. The deformed serpent could now easily see the flaws the great serpent picked at. The memory of Nahezra was not Nahezra. This was something the memory struggled with. She was a flawed, static echo of something perfect. The great serpent's cruel words, a simple pronouncement of know us, rang through her being. They were a hammer shattering the illusion she clung to, the belief that she was, in some small way, a continuation of a divine legacy. Chapter 30. The Young Lord. Harry Potter felt different. It was hard to detangle his swirling emotions, and at first he almost refused Nahezra's request to carry her. The boy just felt different. He knew there was something missing. The woman who healed Aura Dawlish was the first person he saw when he woke up. If he was still afraid of anything, he would have reacted quite negatively. He dispassionately looked at the healing hero, as she was called, and refused to answer questions until the goblins arrived. The great serpent was a strange creature. He felt far better being in the same room with her, but the goblins and their various lessons flashed through his mind as she killed the elven attendants. The goblins who told him about his heritage and his new blood status each had their own take on his partner. Learning he was rich and came from a fascinating family felt bittersweet when the ones bearing the news refused to hand anything to him. He knew what a demon was. He knew why she spoke at length about teaching him to find loopholes in contracts. She wasn't a saint, and he did not need a goblin to drop documents on the desk or offer to find a legal guardian to adopt him to know that. They just didn't understand. She made him feel complete. He was the center of her world. He would do anything for Nahezra. He would do anything she asked. He knew that this resolve remained even in his final moments. When his tired brain finally understood that he was speaking to the same Nahezra within the tent, and the only way to do such a thing was to kill him, he wished he died sooner. This final proof of his devotion toward the serpent was what stopped him from refusing Nahezra's request to carry her. This final proof was what stopped him from leaving after she killed those elves. Deep down, very deep down, Harry knew that he would never meet anyone or anything who meant more than the serpent. He was not sure within the framework, but he was sure now. He was sure that the serpent was equally as obsessed with him. If she wasn't, if she could abandon him like the goblins tried to convince him, he was not sure that he could handle it. The serpent promised greatness, and he would do anything, absolutely anything, to follow her. He was her little soldier in training, and he knew she intended to train him hard. He was not sure what for. She never told him. This determination made his steps easier upon leaving the bank. The platinum blonde family across the street from Gringotts looked exactly as the goblin-supplied images did. It was uncanny, the information he learned about Tom Riddle within Gringotts, the talent and ability he had, the grace in dueling. Tom Riddle will eventually return. The soul fragment with Harry told him as much. It was not a matter of if, but only of when. Harry Potter was unsure of what drew Nahezra to him, but he was almost certain it was because of his ability to speak to snakes, an ability he himself was not genetically capable of. Tom Riddle had given him the gift. Tom Riddle had drawn the great serpent to him, and now the same man, the monster known as Lord Voldemort, had the ability to take her away. The thought was a cold, hard poison in Harry's veins. It was unacceptable. He had been content to be her soldier, to follow her commands without question. He had been willing to train for a reason he did not know. But now he had a purpose forged in the fires of a terrible new jealousy. He could not stop the inevitable return of Lord Voldemort, but he could be the one to end him before the wizard could ever try to claim what was his. He picked up pace, walking toward the well-dressed, pure-blood family. Nahezra laid out the path. He simply had to surpass her expectations. He had to show that he was worth her time, her patience. The Malfoys had beautiful, pale, blonde hair, straight postures. The Gringotts dossier on the patriarch of the Malfoy family was expensive, far too costly for the galleons within his air vault. He settled for the public news articles available about the wizard. Mr. Malfoy looked at Harry, appraising the small child walking confidently toward him. Harry Potter's right side of his hair was a radiant golden. While it shone in the sunlight, it was not overly gaudy. On his right side, another golden thing of note. His right hand, the back of it was covered with a golden armguard, a golden half-glove with a solid backplate, leaving the palm uncovered. The gold had the appearance of being liquid. It almost looked like the glove should drip upon the street. Mr. Malfoy could not begin to understand the purpose of the armguard. Harry had joined the ranks of other, long-dead, wizards and witches who were indebted to Nahezra. The last two artifacts, a golden face mask and a golden ring, were the same as the countless other golden objects made from Nahezra's bowl. The sigils and the melted appearance of the golden items before were the same as the bowl and the same as the artifact that Harry wore upon his right hand. However, the subtle symbolism was different. The previous artifacts were created in malice. Harry's artifact, his glove, was the single object Nahezra had molded with magic from the bowl that was not created to ensnare the wizard wearing it. Harry himself did not understand the reason for wearing the glove. It felt like it was not there. Holding his wand felt natural, and he forgot about its presence if he was not thinking about it. If Lucius Malfoy had spent less time worrying about the magical nature of humans and more time attuning himself to magic in general, he would have felt the cold, unyielding magic from the golden handguard. Sadly, Lucius Malfoy was a killer and had trained to be one since his youth. He was far less able to identify strong enchantments than he was able to sniff out the smallest hints of lethal curses. Lucius and wizards of the dark like him were the most blind. His magical talent had been so narrowly focused on offense and defense that he'd become blind to other possibilities. He saw the world in terms of threats and vulnerabilities. To him, Harry's golden handguard was a curiosity, a possible tool or a display of wealth, but he was incapable of sensing its deeper, more ancient magical purpose. Their arrogance and training had created a significant blind spot. Aurors were less blind, but they still suffered from a similar flaw. Their training focused on investigation, protection, and capture. An Auror would sense that the handguard was an enchanted object of some kind, but they wouldn't be able to grasp its true nature. They'd likely be on the lookout for a dangerous curse or a powerful ward, but the idea of a symbiotic bond with a godlike being would be completely outside their training and their experience. Harry, under Nahezra's tutelage, was on a different path. Nahezra's magic was ancient and all-encompassing. She would train him to see magic not as a tool, but as a part of the world itself. Similar to how magical creatures experienced and sensed magic, their bond gave him a deeper insight into the world of magic. He would learn to see the world as great serpents saw it, a web of magical energy, a flowing river of power that could be manipulated and controlled. He would learn to identify the magical signatures of objects and people, a skill that would make him a truly formidable opponent. His unique bond with Nahezra would give him a level of perception that no other wizard in his world possessed. He always had the ability to sense magic, the strange feelings around strong auras, then the German witch, and finally, the cultist. Over time, these feelings became more distinct and noticeable. His experience in the tent showed him what it was like to be encompassed by a truly foreign magical presence, but his time in the bank made him learn true focus. The potions in his blood did more harm than good. His body instinctively used less magic, so the potions wouldn't overreact within him. Harry looked right at Lucius Malfoy, through him even. The child could sense the slightly dark, mostly grey power from the Malfoy family head. Mr. Malfoy was powerful, no doubt about it. It was exactly as Nahezra described. Lucius Malfoy was incredibly dangerous, and the darkness within him was fading. He was a neutral party and willing to follow any side that would have him. He was willing to do anything to maintain and grow his family name. Mr. Malfoy walked ahead of his family to greet the boy personally, a common gesture, one Harry knew he would make. Nahezra gave him a script to follow, and so he did. The Malfoys looked on as the son of a light family, the savior of the magical world, bowed before a former general of the dark. Eyebrows shot up from the Malfoy side. The mother and son shared a surprised look behind the back of Lucius Malfoy. Draco's eyes grew wide. His stories about the light not having manners and recognizing superiority no longer rang true. The boy was a puzzle, and Lucius was determined to solve him. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry bowed, as Nahezra instructed him to do, "I thank you very much for the opportunity to enter your home. Behind me is my wife Narcissa and my heir Draco. We are honored to have you." Draco puffed his chest out slightly at the pronouncement of being the heir. Harry looked up, as the man said this, looking at the woman, then the child in the order that their name was spoken. "Pleasure to meet you all." The Malfoy clan were easily recognizable in public. Lord Malfoy took the lead, ushering the group toward the nearest fireplace. It was not long before Harry was seated, facing the Lord. His wife was to his right, his son to his left. Nahezra remained quiet, magically inert, but still checking for threats. Lady Malfoy asked him subtly probing questions about his childhood, and the strange circumstances surrounding his lack of visibility when growing up. Harry kept the answers vague, as Nahezra suggested, subtly hinting he spent his early life training and learning magic. The house elves provided an extremely late lunch for Harry Potter, and the Malfoy family members ate very light appetizers, their plates a pale imitation of his own. Harry's plate looked delectable, a feast for a king. Between the questions from Narcissa Malfoy, he took his first spoonful of the mashed potatoes.